have not the time or the patience to starve him out. What do you need, Lord Stark? Wispin calmly asked. Domeric had been gracious enough to offer Wispin's expertise for the length of the campaign, while he led the occupation of the Golden Tooth. We need two things, to secure Sarsfield, and we need information, Ned told them. Until now I have been hesitant to send the shepherds from my sight, not with the Valiman so close at hand. Gullen bowed his head, for which we are very appreciative of. That time has now passed. I aim to bring war to Casterly Rock, and that means we must take Ashmark. Sarsfield will keep Tywin's southern lords in check, and we must take a foothold to watch the coast, Ned summarized. Where would you send us? Gullen wondered. To the ruins of Castamaria, use it as a base and report on the movements of the coastal houses, especially Banefort and Fair Isle. Ned hesitated at this next order. I am also ordering you to waylay and capture travelers on the road, at your own discretion. Keep yourselves supplied, and if you have the opportunity, extract what information you can. He stared at Wispin to convey the seriousness of this task. I will pick my men by sundown, Wispin responded with a bow. I will as well, Gullen added. You are dismissed, Ned said. He was left alone, with his table and maps. After a few moments, he reached for his parchment and began composing a letter of condolence to Meja. It would be just one letter of many. // Rob rode fast and light through the riverlands, keeping his men fed and watered with supplies from friendly castles, eager to appease a Tully kinsman. He had been forced to bypass Riverrun and follow the Red Fork east. After a week of travel, they planned to stop at Stonehenge with House Bracken, before making the final leg to the Trident. Stonehenge was like many Riverland castles, wide and short. Rob did not want to inconvenience his great-uncle's vassals, so he ordered his men to make camp outside the walls while he entered to treat with Lord John Bracken. As Rob rode into the courtyard, he was surprised to see knights and pages from House Dare in the stables. One young boy noticed him, or rather noticed Grey Wind, and quickly scurried deeper into the stalls. It was nearing dusk, and Rob expected the castle to be preparing for dinner. He patiently announced his presence to the door guards and was greeted by the Bracken steward. He made appropriate apologies for his sudden appearance and was politely escorted through the halls. He was announced and walked into the feasting hall, where the Brackens and Dares were just tucking into their food. Lord John Bracken, a heavier-set man with wide shoulders and coarse brown hair, looked up in shock when Rob appeared. Quickly he grabbed the attention of his companions, especially a middle-aged man in Dare livery. Rob thought that maybe Sir Raymond Dare, who had taken over many duties from his elderly father. Lord John rose and invited Rob over to the side of the hall. Lord Rob, he greeted, this is a surprise. Has Lord Brynden sent you? Rob shook his head, reached out and shook hands with the Bracken. I apologize for my late intrusion. He gestured to the packed hall. I don't want to interrupt, but I was hoping you would permit my men and I to camp outside your wall for the night, before we make for the Trident in the morning, Rob requested. Lord John took a bit too long to answer. He threw a few glances back to the head table where Sir Raymond was watching them both with a close eye. Rob frowned, noticing a tension in the room. Of course not, John finally said. Are you sure you would not prefer to stay inside? We have the room. Rob turned back to the Lord, and studied his placid face. We'll be moving after first light, and I'd prefer to keep the men road ready, Rob explained. Lord John extended an invitation to eat at the high table with him, but Rob again begged off, stating his men were already preparing good fare. Though he did ask if he could purchase a round of cheese and perhaps some fresher cuts of meat. John insisted on giving them as a gift, as a show of gratitude for Rob's victories against the Lannisters. With a bow and a quick word of acknowledgement to the ladies and lords present, Rob returned to the courtyard. He gathered Grey Wind to his side and noticed the Dare men had gone. The courtyard was empty. Suddenly, Rob recalled why this evening felt familiar, why this creeping tension was climbing his spine. It was like Tarmed Tower. Years ago, when he had followed Harry on to mediate with the Brookbirths and Tarmeds. He felt eyes upon him, and they followed him through the gate. He called the lords and captains to him when he came back to the camp. Something is amiss, but I know not what, Rob told them. Lord Harwood Stout looked back to Stonehenge with a wary eye. Why are the Dares and Brackens here? Should they not be marching with the king and Lord Tully? Rob looked up from his dinner. Lord John O's volunteered to have his men guard the river road, and Uncle Brindon ordered House Dare to watch the Trident. The Nari spoke up from his spot at the campfire, wrinkled and slight, cloaked in furs. What need have these Andals then of a feast when they have duties as sentinels? Black Donald Flint, who had come in the old Flint's stead, added, 4 men sworn to guard the reaches of the kingdoms, they have kept many warriors behind. Rob looked over. What do you mean? Black Donald frowned. I went to barter for oils and horseshoes, they traded a pittance for the supplies, they don't lack any stores. Their barracks is full to bursting, I could hear them singing and shouting. All the men around the fire slowly tensed, each of their observations pulling tighter on the wire in Rob's mind. I will need to inform my uncle. We can stop along the King's Road to send a raven. Mind made up, Rob went to find his sleep. It was light and fitful with flashes of white trees and red roots. He felt the lapping of water at his ankles. A distant clamor rose, voices and cracking wood, the murmurs blended into one harmonious chant, Stark, Dorthic, Death, Dorthic, Stark. Rob opened his eyes, drowsy with that dour message ringing in his ears, to see death lunge for him. He brought his hand up at the last instant, putting the dagger through his palm and not his throat. On instinct he shouted. The dream chant cleared from his ears, allowing him to hear the screams and shouts from outside his tent. The pain from his hand blotted out his reason and memory. He knows he killed the man in his tent, he killed another one outside. He must have gathered his shield, sword and helmet because when he left the tent he was able to block the arrows aimed at his chest. He scrambled past burning tents and dead men, he killed and wounded and gathered what Northmen he found. It was still pitch black with the moon hiding in the clouds. The arrows continued to fall from the walls, and he caught a glimpse of Stonehenge Gate where more Bracken and Dare men were gathering. One of his men stood in front of him. My lord, where do we go? He asked. Rob closed his eyes, clutching his hand tight against his chest. He remembered the feeling of water around his ankles, and white and red. South, he muttered. He turned to his men and raised his sword. We go south. Make for the God's Eye. Rob saw Black Donald distributing horses. They had more steeds than men now, but when it came for Rob to mount he noticed a lone stout man limping away from the camp in the wrong direction. He guided the horse over to him, ignored his protests and shoved him up into the saddle and sent him on his way. Grey Wind finally returned to his side, shoving his head under Rob's shoulder. What is it you want? Rob said, you have to go. Rob felt his wolf's vague desire form in his chest. No, Rob shook his head, that's crazy. Grey Wind would not take no for an answer. There they go, get the horses. Someone shouted from the ruins of his camp. Fine, Rob growled. He gripped the mane and hoisted himself onto Grey Wind's back. It was very different from riding a horse. He needed to stretch out, locking his legs in front of Grey's hips, and with every move, he had to match Grey's movement, pulling himself tight and then extending on the push. It was awkward, he almost fell off more than once and he was obviously too heavy, but he held on and they left Stonehenge behind. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Chapter 48, Songs of Conquest, Part 1. Chapter text. War was always dirty work. Ned had always known that truth. His first war began with heartbreak and anger. It took streets flooded with bodies and enough blood to dye the Trident before it was won. Wispin and his company had been effective. They killed patrols and messengers trying to march past Castemaria and the ruins of Tarbeck. They had stolen supplies when needed, but as agreed stayed away from the villages. His men had taken captives and extracted information from them. This included the movements of the coastal Westerland nobles. Ned now looked across his table at Reynold Westerling, heir to the Crag, captured during the Battle of Southsmoke, joined by his siblings Jane, Elena and Rolam. All three had been captured by Wispin as they were traveling to Casterly Rock for safety. The shepherds and men-at-arms had attacked their large entourage under the cover of night. The girls and boy had been taken swiftly and brought with all haste back to the northern camp. Their comfort had been seen to, and though the younger children were wary, their eldest brother was doing his best to put them at ease. Reynold was a cheerful man, and he knew that unless something very drastic happened they would be relatively safe. Ned had another use for them. He had sent a message to Joffrey, offering a true exchange of prisoners. The Westerlings, barring Reynold, both Lannisters and the rest of the captured knights for the Northern Highborn and captains still in Joffrey's custody. It had been 2 weeks since their first meeting, and the cruel boy had made good on his promise of another wheel only once. It was a horrible sight, set up within sight of Ned's camp upon a low ridge. The next week, no wheel had appeared. Perhaps Joffrey's own lords had persuaded him to stop. Perhaps the boy king had concocted some other torture for his captives. While Ned was stuck in a sort of stalemate, his allies had seen more success. Lord Waynwood had captured Deep Den while Lord Hunter had rebuffed an attack on Sarsfield. Their hold on the Westerlands was solidifying. A messenger quietly entered and presented him with an envelope sealed by a stag and lion. He stood up and examined it at his desk. To Lord Stark. Let it be known that King Joffrey, first of his name, does not show weakness to his enemies. What use does the King of the Seven Kingdoms have for the scions of a destitute house who live in a crumbling ruin? You can keep the Westerlings for the beggars they are. As for the Lannisters of Lannisport, there are a dozen for each Lannister of the Rock, and the king is not in need of knights who cannot avoid capture. Once again, King Joffrey demands you surrender yourself and your lords to his rightful judgment and bend the knee to your true king, in the name of the Iron Throne and the Seven who are one. It was a short note, written with an experienced hand, likely the Maester of Ashmark, but the arrogance and impudence sprouted from Joffrey's crooked tongue. Ned sighed and turned back to look at the Westerlings. Orin, he called. His aide entered quickly. The man had been invaluable to this campaign. Ned would have to ensure he received an appropriate reward. Prepare an escort for our prisoners to be taken back to Riverrun, he quietly ordered. Ned took a deep breath and turned back to the table. He found all 4 Westerlings watching him. I'm afraid King Joffrey has denied my request for ransom, Ned told them. He handed the letter over to Reynold. The knight read it, and Ned saw the moment the young man's jaw locked and his nostrils flared. Good, this kind of insult should not be kept private. Ned wondered if Joffrey had even shared his offer with Lord Westerling. What does that mean for us? Jane asked. You will be taken to Riverrun, under the authority of House Tully, my wife's kin. There you shall stay for the foreseeable future, Ned told her. They all seemed shaken and turned quickly to their brother. Ned left them to grapple with the news. He only had a few more hours of peace before his commanders sought him out in the late afternoon. Joffrey Hill is leaving Ashmark, he's heading west, Harley's Hornwood reported. The man had been swimming in wine after his son's death, and still stood shakily most mornings. Ned shook his head. Why, by the gods, is he doing that? Some of the men began chuckling, struck by the sheer incredulity. To leave your fortress, march towards your enemy and give them enough time to prepare for your approach. Ned could only come to one conclusion: there's truly no one to rein the boy in. I'm starting to wonder if the old lion even knows what his shit stain of a grandson is doing out here. Gratian passed out ale. Harley's eagerly took a mug. He must know by now, but what's he going to do? If he so much as peeks out of the rock, then the Valyman will sweep down behind him and take the city and the fortress. Mage nodded along. If the boy won't listen to men like Marbrand or Crickehall, who will he listen to? Hopefully, no one, Harry on joked. The lords seemed optimistic and Ned left them to their revelry as he thought of the battle to come. They were outnumbered, and the Lannisters had knowledge of the countryside. There was a very narrow chance of a Pyrrhic victory, but if they suffered even a minor defeat, that would give Tywin a chance to push out from his den. Joffrey leaving Ashmark gave Ned an opportunity. Now all he needed was a way to capitalize on it. He jotted down a set of instructions on a slip of parchment and handed it to a servant. Have that delivered to Sir Wispin, he instructed, and find Lord Ryswell. My lord? Donal Locke questioned. Ned turned back, putting aside the cups and goblets on the table. We are going to pick our field of battle carefully. His eyes swept over the map, tracing Joffrey's movements and his men's best guess of his destination, which was, ironically, on the same tract of land that Sousmoke sat on. West of the tower, the small mining range called Carston Trail. Ned's maps were stitched together from outrider sketches and prisoner descriptions, but they painted a clear enough picture of 3 small mining towns that ran along a stretch of the lower mountains running east to west. They bypassed the wider valleys and thick copses that neighbored Sousmoke and Ashford. If Joffrey's commanders had any sense, they would use that stretch of road and the villages to safely move west, then circle around the left flank and once again put Ned into the awkward position of having to stop and face his enemy on terrain of their choosing. Joffrey had made his move, and now Ned needed to respond. He had the advantage in only one way, the support of reliable men and a retinue of master woodsmen. The Andals may have held sway over the Westerlands for centuries, but the old gods saw far, and the shepherds told him the roots of the weirwoods still laid beneath the earth here. Lord Ryswell strode in. "You called, Lord Stark." Ned waved him forward as the rest of the commanders circled around the map. Forward slash 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 forward slash. "Where are my knights?" the king screamed. Roland Crickehole turned his head down to hide his exasperation. King Joffrey had awoken in a foul mood. The Lord of Crickehole had been summoned this morning by the royal attendants when they heard the cries of the king's page. The unlucky boy had to be carried from the royal tent, missing half his teeth. King Joffrey had been raging on one issue or another endlessly since then. "They are assembling," my king Lord Stackspear reassured. King Joffrey rose from his cushioned seat, stolen from the high table of some lord's feast hall, and downed another goblet of wine, his third or fourth since this meeting had started. "I want to be past the mines by the end of the day," Joffrey commanded. Roland felt he had to speak up. "Your Grace, Carston Trail runs along narrow roads and across a gorge. We won't be able to march more than 2 men abreast. It'll take most of the day to get through the first 2 villages." The king turned and slammed a hand down on the table. "I did not ask for your counsel, I gave an order." Roland kept his expression calm, and his voice low. "You will need your army at full strength when you face the lords of the North and Vale." One thing all the men in this room knew was the king saw a challenge in nearly any opinion that did not match his. Lord Daemon Marbrand's absence was an example of the king's fickle nature. Lord Daemon had refused to allow any more prisoners from Ashmark's dungeon to be used for the king's prayer wheels, calling them an abomination and slight against the gods. King Joffrey had nearly ordered the man's death, but his septon and some subtle counsel had convinced him to instead strip Lord Daemon of his command and order him to remain in Ashmark for the remainder of the war. His son Adam would lead the Marbrand forces instead. It was not a popular decision, but it was the best Roland and his fellows could get away with. They couldn't very well protect Ashmark if their king ordered them to sack it. "Fine," King Joffrey spat, "then I want them moving through the night. I have no time for laziness. They will receive no rest until my orders are carried out." The king pushed his way out of the tent, followed by Amory Locke. He left Roland and the other lords alone with the burden of organizing the army, an army that would be looking at a 12, perhaps 14-hour day ahead of them. "7 preserve us," Lord Stackspear muttered. Roland could only scoff. The king wanted to pass the mines, then cut hard to the southeast and confront Lord Stark along the banks of Soot Lake. "Drown the wolf," as the king said. It took the rest of the morning to coordinate the marching order and get underway. He rode with his own retinue, while his sons, Tybalt and Lyle, accompanied the supply wagons at the rear. He felt anxious as the army embarked the trail. They sent a large group of scouts into the first town, Carpton, and found only a few families left. After Carpton the army slowed even further. They crossed a series of bridges curved along the hilly path and over a gravel gorge, giving them a full view of the mine shafts that dotted the mountain base to the north. He could still see men moving between the work camps. War or peace, mining needed to be done, he supposed. When he finally reached west, the middle point of the trail, the sun was setting and there were men passing out in the shade of buildings and trees. Roland found a number of knights and lords in the large alehouse, holding a small dinner. "How many have made it through?" he asked. "Less than half," Lord Westerling informed him. "The king?" A knight from House Lefford looked over. "He rode through hours ago, ordered 10 men whipped to motivate the rest." Roland swallowed a mouthful of ale. "Keep them moving," he ordered. He wanted badly to bunk down for the night, but knew the king would not tolerate it. Back outside he had his squires fetch fresh horses. Regardless of their fatigue, the infantry was driven forward. Sleeping men were beaten back into the ranks, some tying themselves together by rope to stay upright. Roland sent a page to relieve Tybalt and Lyle, Together they pushed forward to reach the final town, Ordip, in the hour of ghosts. They commandeered a house, slept, and awoke only a few hours later at the insistence of their servants. The king was calling his commanders, they said. Roland left the house, still exhausted and starving. The army hadn't set up camp so much as fell along the hard-packed ground. He stepped over hedge. Knights passed out against their horses, and men at arms dozing in piles. He couldn't help but notice the royal tents were perfectly arranged and the king's personal cooks were filling their fires with food and spices. The king himself also looked well rested. Roland wished for the war to end quickly, if only so the boy could return to King's Landing, and become some other man's tormentor. "Good morning, my king," Roland and Tybalt greeted. Joffrey looked up from his loaded plate, grease smeared across his chin. "What did I tell you, Lord Crickehall?" The king threw out, "I got the army over in one night." Roland smiled and refrained from pointing out that men were still marching across the trail and nodded, "I have been proven wrong, your grace." He saw his son's eyes tighten. They both noted the lack of supply wagons among the slumbering troops. They must have been held up somewhere after West. "Now we find Stark, and put the mongrel to bed," Joffrey boasted. "I've already sent out riders to find them." A servant brought more plates and Roland was able to fill his stomach. An hour or so later, men began shouting and the tent flap was torn open by Sir Leon Lanny, a meek man who had been grabbed by Joffrey as he hastily left Casterly Rock. "Leon the Lame," Joffrey called out. Sir Leon had looked miserable the day he arrived at Ashmark and he looked miserable now, his eyes wide and face sweat-stained. "Your Grace," Leon stuttered, "we've sighted the enemy." Joffrey clapped and laughed, "Excellent." "Where?" Leon looked at Roland, fear in his eyes, and Roland already knew the answer. "On the march towards us," Leon said. Joffrey's smile twisted, there was a flash of fear but he covered it with anger. "You worm! Why didn't you inform me earlier?" Joffrey screamed, launching a plate full of food across the room. Leon's tongue twisted, unable to summon up even a meager excuse. The night had probably come the moment he was informed. "Get out!" Joffrey screeched. Leon fled the tent, the smart move. Roland stood and Tybalt followed. "What are your orders, my king?" he asked. Joffrey paced back and forth, gnawing on his lip and wringing his hands. "How far are they?" Joffrey asked. "I don't know, your grace," Roland answered. Joffrey whipped back and pointed a wine-stained finger at him, "Found out." Roland bowed and followed Sir Leon. Thankfully, the man hadn't gone far. Already lords and knights were congregating, the alarm was being sounded. Men were shouting but far too many were still asleep, dead to the world. Roland shouted, grabbing attention, "Sir Leon. What did the riders see?" 4, maybe 500 horsemen riding along the tree line to the south of us, and from the dust trails in the woods they must be moving thousands on foot, perhaps their entire army," Leon explained. "We have only a few hours before they arrive." Lord Hamill picked up panic in Leon's voice, "We aren't in any position to repel them, we have no defenses. The town is too small, the cavalry won't be able to muster properly." Roland cursed, he needed to take command and quickly. "We'll move the men back onto Carston Trail," he commanded, "use the narrow road to create a choke point and then fortify the towns. The rearguard will hold Ordrip while we fortify west." "What then, Lord Crickehall?" someone asked. Tybalt spoke up then, "We push the bastards back down the road to the forest, then use the opening to retreat and make for Ashmark. Even a plan created in haste was better than no plan at all." The commanders scattered to follow Roland's orders. Father Tybalt said, "We should abandon the trail, head straight to Ashmark and send word to Lord Tywine." "And who will convince King Joffrey?" "You." "I prefer you with your head attached," my son Roland told him. Roland had rallied his army at Casterly Rock on Lord Tywine's order, and when his liege lord Hadler and his royal grandson had taken 8,000 men at arms and marched without leave, the Lord of the Rock had sent Crickehall, Stackspear and others to follow him. They'd finally caught up to the king, but by then it was too late to return home. Roland sent his heir away to prepare, while he watched as slowly, agonizingly, the ranks of the men shakily stood. The men who arrived last were the least rested, and unfortunately, that meant they would be defending Ordrip. They were simply in no state to walk back up the trail. He left command of the rearguard with Lord Westerling. The king at least ordered the Mountain and his men to stay behind. The beastly night would make the enemy think twice about a swift charge. Roland made it to West in good order, and was satisfied to see fortifications already being planned. The town itself would be short a few houses and fences, but they would serve the army well. One thing stood out to him as he rode through the town. "Where are the supply wagons?" he asked a passing captain. "The wagons," the captain looked confused. "They should already be in Ordrip, my lord." "When did you arrive?" Roland wondered. "Last, my lord, we left Carpton only a few hours ago," the captain told him. Roland sent the man on. Where had the wagons gone? They weren't in Carpton, but Tybalt had escorted them halfway to West. Even if they didn't make it to Ordrip, he would have encountered them on the road here. Yet, they were nowhere to be found. Roland feared they had never made it to West at all. "Lyle!" Roland called out. "Father!" Lyle boomed out, emerging from a crowd of men constructing a palisade. His son preferred to personally command the heavy infantry. The strong boar favored cracking skulls on foot rather than from horseback. Roland gripped his son's arm, speaking intently. "Take 50 men and ride towards Carpton. The supply wagons are missing, find them." "Yes, Father," Lyle answered, excited to be moving. Roland could always count on his second son to be hot-blooded. He returned to the task of fortifying the town. They held there for hours, more men trickling in. Even the king's retinue came through. Just as quickly the king departed, stating that he was going to secure the end of the trail, taking him out of danger. Roland thanked the seven. With King Joffrey out of the way, there was no chance he would countermand Roland's orders. A messenger ran through the barricade, dusty and shaking. "Report," Roland commanded. The boy bowed, and sucked down a breath. "The Knights of the Vale have arrayed themselves outside of Ordrip. They are led by Lord Redfort, and he gave Lord Westerling terms of surrender." "And?" Roland pressed. "Lord Westerling refused. He is preparing for the coming assault, but he sent me to warn you," the boy said. "About what?" Roland asked. There was no sign of the infantry. Roland took a few seconds to absorb his statement. It made no sense. The scouts, both the king's and his own, had seen the dust and the birds scattering from the forest. What else could that have been but the footmen? "Where did they go?" Roland demanded. The messenger only shook his head. Roland ignored him and wheeled around, trying to find someone trustworthy, but Tybalt was organizing the archers and Lyle had yet to return from his search. Before he could even call out for someone, a cry rose up, of surprise and fear. He looked back to the road leading to Ordrip, but those soldiers were quiet, just as startled. "Oh no!" Roland gasped. He drew his sword. "To the east," he bellowed, gathering the attention of what men he could to the road from Carpton. He arrived just in time to see his son Lyle and his riders come galloping back, peppered with arrows. Chased by a sight from his nightmares. The Northmen came roaring down the road. Clumped tight, shoulder to shoulder behind thick shields with long spears and heavy axes. Roland's palisades were cobbled together and held up by bodies more than wood. Tybalt tried to get the archers into position. The town was not built with defense in mind. In the blink of an eye the enemy crashed into West. Bodies clogged the narrow entrance, forcing men to spill down the steep hillside, moving around the makeshift walls while trying to avoid a deadly tumble. Roland risked climbing atop a set of barrels only to see more and more men coming towards them, hundreds and hundreds neatly packed onto Carston Trail. They must have swept through what meager forces had made it to Carpton. Did they catch the king unaware? Roland had little time to worry about his liege, not with Tybalt shouting for a retreat. Emerging over the rocky hill face on the north edge of the town were wild men in fur and chain, rushing to break the archers his son was commanding. Roland's heart sank even further. The men in the mining camps. If their families had fled, why would any sane man remain at the mines? It was all a trick. When the first man ran, choosing his life over his honor, the rest broke. Some went back towards Ordrip and Lord Westerling, while most simply took their chances down the hillside. Roland saw more than one man trip and roll, breaking their bodies against the sharp rocks and thick stumps. The war cries echoed around him. Stark. The North. The Quiet Wolf. The Vale. Arryn. King Stannis. Roland lashed out, striking down savage after savage, but a sword cut through his shoulder and a mace broke his back. The Lord of Crickehole died, brought to ruin by the arrogance of a boy. Forward slash 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 forward slash. War was dirty work. Ned had always known that truth. The roads of Carston Trail were cluttered with dying men. Bodies dotted the hillside and what remained of King Joffrey's army was scattering in every direction. West was burning and likely would be ash by morning. The people that called this place home would feel the bitter defeat far more than any lord or knight who actually fought on its ground. This victory was not easily won either, it came with a heavy toll for the Knights of the Vale. To stop the Westermen in Ordrip from reinforcing their comrades, Lord Redfort had led his knights in a fearsome charge that split Joffrey's men. It put them in a vulnerable position and many brave men fell, but they managed to overwhelm and capture Lord Westerling, Sir Adam Marbrand, and many others. Ashmark would inevitably fall now, by surrender or starvation. Ned and his comrades were confident that the northern Westerlands had been cowed into submission. The remaining lords would not risk marching against King Stannis now, with the enemy given a clear path into their lands. He had already sent messengers to Pink Maiden and Wayfarer's Rest to call up Riverlander levies to reinforce their occupation. Most impressive of all, Gregor Clegane was wounded. With sheer numbers, Sir Perrin Melcombe of Old Anchor led a band of 30 men and cut down the mountain's band before hammering the monster himself. Perrin nearly took his sword arm off at the elbow. Eyewitnesses described the mountain as stumbling on his steed, disorientated. They said Clegane even killed some of his own men in confusion, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Sir Perrin, now being praised as the Steel Anchor, was one of many heroes from the battle on the trail. Ned was proud to see Smalljon, his future good son, roaring triumphantly to a crowd of cheering men. Smalljon had led his own retinue and a large number of mountain clansmen to hike the side of West's Hill, cutting deep into the enemy's unprepared flank, pushing the rest of the defenders to rout. Great Jon would be boasting for months. The only thing Ned regretted was the escape of King Joffrey. The boy had been traveling back towards Carpton, he should have been caught on the road unprepared, but his party had sharp eyes. They caught sight of the northern force attacking and fled down a goat path before anyone was close. Riders were still combing the hills for any tracks, but there was no sign of him. It seemed that Joffrey Hill had inherited his grandfather's penchant for narrowly escaping the noose. Still, Joffrey's flight was an opportunity that couldn't be passed on. Bronze Yohn was determined to pin Tywine into a corner, and the entire army was gathering to descend on Lannisport and Casterly Rock. King Stannis had sent word that once the Lannisters had been neutralized, Ned was to send any available forces south into the Reach. His king's war against the Tyrells had ground to a halt. Bitterbridge and Longtable had fallen after months-long sieges, but the royal armies had been unable to establish a firm footing on the western side of the Mondea. Lord Tarly had kept the king at bay through several battles, hemming him in, preventing him from joining with the Florents. The lords of the Red Lake that had risen against Highgarden had been crushed by House Rowan. House Florent proved surprisingly formidable. They had gained the loyalty of the Shield Islands and held the greater part of the Mondea in a firm grip. On the seas, the deal made with the Dornish had successfully stopped the Red Wine fleet from crossing into the Narrow Sea, but the Royal fleet had yet to strike at the Arbor or its harbours. Ned understood that King Stannis was in a precarious position. If House Hightower marched in force, the Florents would be hard-pressed to defend against them and House Rowan, but if the Royal fleet could break the Red Wines, then Stannis would be free to sail up the Mondea straight to Highgarden. All Stannis needed to finish this war was the north and the Vale to sweep down through Golden Grove, allowing the king to push against Highgarden from 3 directions. Of course, that was easier said than done, and rumors about Stannis and his Red Witch were flying across the kingdoms. These stories about shadows and strange rituals were sitting ill with his vassals, and a part of Ned himself feared pyres once again gracing the Red Keep. He could only hope that once his throne was secured, Stannis could be convinced to give up this fiery god. Until that time, Ned knew his duty. War was dirty work, and it was not over yet. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Robb wasn't a stranger to being desperate. When he marched from Moat Cailin to save his grandfather and mother, he had been desperate. Chasing Tywin Lannister across the Riverlands had been a desperate move. There is a difference, Robb realized, between having an army at your back and leading a group of starving men. His band of survivors put distance between them and Stonehenge, 2 days of non-stop travel with only small breaks to forage. Robb knew there were a few smaller keeps between them and Harrenhal, but he couldn't risk it. If House D'Arry and Bracken had been swayed by Baelish to declare for Joffrey, because what other reason could there be for this betrayal, then no Bracken vassal was a safe haven, and who knows what other lords and ladies had turned their cloaks against his family. No, he had to push to Harrenhal. Taking stock of his men, he rode to the front of their loose formation. They had paid for a few extra mounts at a small town, letting Grey Wind take a break from carrying Robb. Men, Robb said, drawing their eyes, we will be in sight of Harrenhal soon, and there we will find rest and food. My kinswoman, Lady Went, will welcome us with open arms. Once there, I will write to my father, my great-uncle and the king himself. These traitors will not have long to celebrate and boast. He saw life enter the eyes of his soldiers. Black Donald began chuckling, always a fan of grim humor. Let the D'Arrys and Brackens toast to themselves. We are mighty, for we routed men who called themselves allies in the dead of night. We have routed the young wolf, they will say. How they will laugh. Robb grinned. I think I will enjoy those tales. Perhaps I'll even ask the lords to recount the night themselves, right before I take their heads, he shouted. The Nari laughed and Lord Stout slapped his men on the shoulders, joining in on raising morale. Or maybe, Robb wondered aloud, I'll tell them a story of my own. One about horses and ploughmen, straying too far into the forests, where wolves lie. The rest of their trip was in higher spirits. The men were looking forward to a reprieve. Harrenhal did appear, as Robb predicted. The black towers loomed above them, like a hand attempting to strangle the sky with jagged fingers. When Robb announced himself at the gate, the guards were skeptical. The Master-at-Arms observed him with a frown until Grey Wind made himself known. The giant wolf was better than any flag or badge. Inside the truly massive castle yard, Robb dismounted, his back and legs stiff and sore. He looked around and saw for the first time, Lady Went. She was a diminutive woman, with light brown hair pulled tight into a bonnet. Her age was hard to guess, but she had been a cousin of Robb's grandmother Minissa and had outlived her husband, the old Lord Went. Her people were subdued but competent. He was surprised to see so few in the cavernous shadow of Harren's towers. Bearing in mind that Lady Went held their fate in her hands, Robb approached her with his lords. He gave a deep bow, his men following suit. Lady Went, Robb began, thank you for your warm welcome. My lady mother has spoken of you, and I hope we do not impose. Lady Shella watched him with a tired frown, bags hung under her eyes but she stood on her own. Lord Stark, she began, it would be the height of disrespect to turn you away. You are kin to my liege lord and kin to House Went. You and your men are more than welcome. I will admit to being confused. I was under the impression you and your lord father were fighting in the Westerlands. Robb offered his arm and escorted Lady Shella into the nearby hall. Have you heard of Balon Greyjoy's invasion? Robb asked. Lady Shella nodded. You were traveling home then? Yes, but we stopped at Stonehenge to rest a few days ago, Robb told her. In the night, we were attacked on the orders of our host. Lady Shella's eyes went wide. House Bracken would dare. Robb shook his head, taking a moment to take in the high ceiling of the hall they'd entered. Not just Brackens, House D'Arry whet their swords as well. His hostess took a seat at a nearby table, absorbing the news. She shut her eyes and curled in on herself. Robb was overtaken. The sight could so easily have been replaced with his own mother. If father had been unable to escape King's Landing, if the Kingslayer had found Robb on the battlefield, if Riverrun had fallen to siege, if the Ironborn were victorious. His own mother could have been the same, sitting alone in the halls of Winterfell, her children and husband gone. He knelt then before this woman who shared his blood, no matter how thin, and alone ruled in the ghostly ruins of a tyrant's tomb. Robb reached out, and delicately held Shella's hands in his own. These men have made a mistake, Robb assured her. They have let themselves be swayed by a traitor and have pledged themselves to a cruel boy king. The Blackfish will not stand for this, and my brother shall be Lord Tully after him. The North has a long memory. I cannot promise you peace, Lady Went, but I do swear, upon the name of Winterfell, that I shall protect your lands. By being here, by being accepted here, Robb had already pulled the lady and her subjects into danger. Lady Shella looked up at his declaration. She did not cry, but he saw wistfulness in the corners of her eyes. Perhaps she remembered other young men, with her hair and her husband's face. Whatever her mind conjured, she swallowed and then nodded. Harrenhal is yours, Lord Stark. Robb took on his new task with a determination worthy of his ancestors. First, he ensured his men were fed and rested while he familiarized himself with Harrenhal's grounds and people. He has messages sent to King's Landing, to Stannis' last known position in the Reach, to as many Riverland keeps as he could, and to Winterfell. He had to hope that Sansa would be able to direct the northern forces against the Ironborn. The last he heard, Victory and Greyjoy had taken Moat Cailin, but the Mandaealis had marched to keep him there. The rebel rivermen's first action was to, unsurprisingly, attack House Blackwood. Robb doubted anything less than a promise to attack the Bracken ancestral rival would have swayed them over. It did provide him time. Alongside those two, a large coalition of minor houses sallied out to attack their neighbors. From High Heart to the Stony September fighting erupted. Robb was surprised that so many houses had enough troops in reserve to actually fight. They must have sent only the expendable men to march with the king. Or worse, Robb thought they had sent traitors into the heart of Stannis' army. He could only hope his message reached the king before the snakes chose to act. Baelish must have been given plenty of money and information on top of using Tywin Lannister's name. Fomenting this level of conflict was no mean feat. Robb knew grudges and feuds always simmered between nobles, especially neighbors. He'd read entire chapters of Stark journals complaining about some lord throwing the North into upheaval over one disagreement or another. After all, hadn't the Starks exiled the ancient Blackwoods from their forest over such a trivial matter? He recalled a rejected marriage proposal that led to stolen livestock that led to a fist fight that led to an all-out war. Cregan Stark once wrote that to ignore the men beneath you was to walk through the snow barefoot. Robb had begun organizing his Northmen and the Went levies into a functioning force, but they were a minor threat at most, only some 300 men and 40 horsemen. They could raid, but taking a castle was out of the question. Without authority granted to him by Riverrun, he doubted any lords would be willing to heed his commands, not unless they were attacked first. That very scenario was heralded in the form of a wounded woman. A milkmaid arrived at their gates, the sister of Lady Went's head cook, tired and bruised. She fled from her home, the small keep of Lorewood, the seat of House Roger, after their lands were raided by House Keith of Hooked Cap. Finally, Robb could take real action. With directions and a clear plan, Robb's army marched out along the crest of the God's Eye and drove the Keith men out, town by town, until they finally reached Lorewood. Lord Roger's steward, his great-nephew, could do little to argue with Robb, not when his lands had been saved from their neighbors. They added more men, again the dregs of the levies and those who had recently come of age. Robb, with Lady Went's support, forced House Keith to cease hostilities. The Blackwoods gave a valiant defense in the weeks that Robb rode from east to west, putting a stop to the chaos and theft. Riverlanders are ever ready to take what they can grab, wary of any war, but prepared to weather its arrival in their homes. For some lords, Robb brokered peace, others he defeated in the field. All the while he knew the Daeari and Bracken army would soon be coming for him. Raventree Hall fell on the third week. By all reports the gatehouse was stormed with ladders and the Blackwoods surrendered when the castle proper was set aflame. Lord Tytos and 3 of his sons were marching with the king, which meant it must have been young Ben Blackwood ruling in his father's place. A hard thing for a boy so green, to witness the enemy ransack your home. Robb could only pray that the rest of the family did not suffer unneeded indignities. Now that they had trampled their rivals, the horses and ploughmen turned their eyes on Harrenhal. Robb had a scant few weeks to retreat back into the fortress and stock what supplies he could. Lady Went didn't counter his orders and just helped prepare her people for the oncoming siege. Robb seriously considered fleeing. He had the time and the supplies to retreat, either to King's Landing or to Riverrun, but neither option helped him or his family. Until the king could restore order, Robb had to keep these turncloaks distracted, keep them too afraid of leaving their lands to join with the king's enemies. Robb had already proven he could unite and command the petty lords, the traitors could not risk leaving him alone any longer. That meant enduring a siege. Well, there were worse castles to defend. The armies came midweek after a stretch of rainfall. The camps took only a few days to spread out along the plains in front of the castle. Rob took the opportunity to walk along the great stone defences and observe his enemies. The Brackens and Dare had mustered the largest force currently in the Riverlands, but it was only 12,000 men combined. Rob's vanguard during his march south alone held 6,000 horsemen. He had fought larger battles, and won. Harren Al's sheer height afforded the archers incredible range, pushing the enemy into staying almost half a mile away. It was impossible to approach Harren Al's walls unseen or with any great speed. The defenders would always be able to prepare. It gave them breathing room and the ability to set fortifications along the earthen moat. Rob was confident that with the larders stocked and the wells full, they would be quite comfortable for the foreseeable future. He turned back from the armies, leaving thoughts of strategy for the morning. The sun was setting and deep shadows were already consuming the yards. Harren Al was a cursed place, especially after dark. It felt as if the night brought memories from the past to the forefront of his mind. His dreams had twisted and gnarled into ugly things. He saw the Kingslayer with skin made of gold tear his father's legs off and eat them raw while the rest of the Lannisters laughed and lounged in pools of green fire. He heard voices speak from cracked stones and drooping hills. Dorthig, they repeated, over and over. Dorthig, he heard it the first time, when they were ambushed at Stonehenge, and he could not remember its meaning from any of Bourne's lessons. Perhaps if he still had the Stark histories he could find it, but alas, he had left them behind in Winterfell at the onset of the war. Rob intended to quickly finish dinner and then tuck in for the night. Just as he reached the Tower of Hosts, his personal quarters, his palm throbbed. Rob looked down with a wince. The bandages were woven tight with a small splint. If his hand was twinging, then it was unlikely he'd fall asleep anytime soon. Best make use of what daylight remained. Rob whistled for Grey Wind to follow him to the Godswood. The Godswood of Harren Al was an intimidating sight, 20 acres of birches, oaks, pines, and sentinels, home to entire colonies of bats and families of birds, with only a small meandering stream dividing the ground. Harren the Black may have worshipped the drowned god, but above his piety, his arrogance and ego reigned supreme. The greatest fortresses in Westeros all had Godswoods, from Highgarden to Storm's End. Even the Eyrie kept their ancient garden intact. Harren wished to build the greatest castle in the land, and so he had to have the tallest towers, thickest walls, and the King of the Isles and Rivers decided he would also have the largest Godswood. Rob worried he'd get lost in the boughs if not for Grey Wind. He took a careful route, following the running water towards the Heartree. The only sign of the old god's presence, or any god's presence, in the whole fortress. Harren Al was an unholy thing. The few messages he had sent across the lake to the Isle of Faces had gone unanswered, and none of the shepherds had survived the ambush at Stonehenge. The water guided him to a misshapen clearing. The ground was uneven, mixing gravel, stone and mud. Sitting at the center was the crooked, bent Heartree, with its wide eyes and angry snarl. Rob approached it slowly, taking time to count the 13 cuts running down its bark. Wounding a Heartree was an offense to the gods, not even animals dared mark them. There was no solace here. The creak of branches and animals echoed and morphed into whispers and cackles. Grey Wind sat close by, hunched over his paws. Rob closed the distance to the Heartree. He reached out, pondering what would motivate a man to strike a sacred tree, over and over. His hand, still bandaged and splotched red from his injured hand, brushed against the deep marks. Grey Wind howled and the eyes of the Heartree moved. Rob's hand seized, and he fell into darkness. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Chapter 49, Songs of Conquest, Part 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. He is sitting at a table. He is sitting at a table, there is food in front of him. He is sitting at a table, there is food in front of him and a woman sitting to his right. He is standing in a hall. He is standing in a hall, there is screaming. He is standing in a hall, there is screaming, and there are crossbow bolts in his back. He is kneeling on the floor. He is kneeling on the floor, he calls out. He is kneeling on the floor, he calls out and a dagger pierces his chest. He is sitting at a table. He is sitting at a table, there is a sword in front of him. He is sitting at a table, there is a sword in front of him and a tree stands to his right. Young wolf, a gentle voice whispered. He is sitting at a table. You are a Dorthig, young wolf. There is a sword in front of him. You have leaped away from your death blow, not once but twice. You have lived where the song said you would not. A tree stands to his right. The leaves rustle in a silent breeze. Rob finally mustered the strength to speak. What is happening? The song continues, he heard, regardless of those who have lost their place in the melody. He is sitting at a table, a lion pelt is draped across the surface. I must protect the Riverlands, Rob replied. He is sitting at a table, there is a bowl of water in his lap. There are yet singers who would aid you. They have hidden themselves for many seasons. Rob recalled Bourne's lessons, there are children here. They will help you, but they require something in return. Rob swallowed, a pact. The voice hesitated, no. There is no need for a pact. A debt would suffice. These children will help me defend the Riverlands. Rob asked. The tree at his side grew tall, sheltering him. They will open a doorway, but you, young wolf, must step through it. He is sitting at a table. He is sitting at a table, there is food in front of him. He is sitting at a table, there is food in front of him and a woman sitting to his right. He is standing in a hall. He is standing in a hall, there is cheering. He is standing in a hall, there is cheering and there is music in his ears. He is kneeling on the floor. He is kneeling on the floor, he calls out. He is kneeling on the floor, he calls out and a child runs into his arms. Awaken, Dorthig. Rob awoke nestled in the muddy stream, soaked through. Grey wind was laying at the edge, lapping at the water. How long was I sleeping? Rob asked his friend. Grey wind looked up, not at his master, but to the west. The wolf sniffed at the wind, then trotted off in the same direction. Rob stood up and slowly walked along the pebbles and roots. From what he remembered, the stream originated from an underground spring connected to the God's Eye. The water led up the grounds of the Godswood for a good while, until its source could be found close to the western curtain wall. He stopped and stared. Grey Wind was not standing by the frothing stream head coming from the small pool. His companion was sniffing around the small mound beside it. The mound stood at nearly Rob's full height. It was a known landmark to the people of the castle, but now it held an opening on its side that looked like a great stone had been rolled away. The opening led downwards, in a gentle slope. Grey Wind, guard, Rob ordered. He quickly rushed out of the Godswood, calling for his men and aides, hardly noticing the bandage around his hand slipping off, revealing a healed scar running across his palm. Rob returned with a party of men, lamps and supplies. Fearlessly, he led his escort down into the mound, ignoring their questions and assuaging their concerns. He carefully navigated the tunnel as it turned to the north and continued for nearly an hour, straight and true like an arrow. They all knew this could be no natural formation, but it lacked any signs of being some hidden work of the old Ironborn kings. There were several offshoot paths, smaller tunnels that snaked back and forth. Leery of losing their way, Rob stuck to the large path they began on. They finally saw the surface again when they walked upwards and emerged from another mound, in a small godswood nestled into a deep copse of trees. Rob turned to Lady Went's huntsman. Bernard was his name. Can you find out where we are? The man looked doubtful, staring up at the rising moon as he moved through the trees, trying to find his way out of the trunks. He stopped at the edge of the tree line. My lord, Bernard whispered, gazing at the lights of a distant keep, that is Castle Direwolf. All the men began to mutter in shock. Are you sure? Rob pressed. Bernard nodded. I was born in Harroway Town, Lord Stark. I would know the shape of Direwolf no matter the time of day. This Godswood must lie past Bowbridge. Rob took a few moments to absorb the news. The children had done more than create a way out of Harrenhal, they had given him a path to the front step of his enemies. Where do you think the other tunnels go? Lord Stout wondered. Rob carefully stepped back down into the tunnel and grinned up at his men, teeth glittering in the twilight. Let's find out. Surging with energy, the band of men scoured the tunnels, carefully creating a map of routes. They found openings leading as far west as Ripolidone Rill and as far east as Kermit Hollow within sight of the Trident. Rob sent Black Donald with a band of scouts to gather more supplies and make contact with the lords and stewards who hadn't been able to join Rob's retreat to Harrenhal. He needed to consolidate them into one force. So it went, men would enter the Godswood and return with bags of fresh supplies, weapons and slowly, reinforcements. Finally, after a week of preparing, Rob put his plan into action. Once again using the tunnels, he led 100 men armed to the teeth to the wood outside Dare. He took another 50 men even further, carefully moving underground and emerging after nightfall at the base of a weirwood surrounded by flowers and sparse trees in a small courtyard, the flag of House Dare flying from the ramparts above. Rob knelt, keeping watch as his soldiers spread out. "Bernard," he whispered, "direct us." The huntsman nodded and went to each of the commanders, sending them towards the gatehouse, the ploughman's keep, and the great hall. Rob went to the keep, sword drawn, wolf by his side. The Dares had left a pitiful garrison behind, confident that with Harrenhal so close, they could afford to commit their full strength. Sir Raymond had left behind his family as well. Lord Margan Dare was nearly as old as Walder Free, some 70 years old, and quite frail by all accounts, but it was Sir Raymond's young son and heir, Liman, that was the true prize. Rob and his men stormed the ploughman's keep. Thankfully they only had to kill a handful of guards before the maids and attendants surrendered. They found the elderly lord and his grandson in their chambers, fast asleep. Rob ordered no harm be done to them and simply set men to watch the door. The gatehouse and great hall were similarly dealt with, and the men kept calm heads as Rob had instructed. The gates were opened soon to be garrisoned by loyal rivermen, cutting off House Dare from their home. 5 days later, the sun bled through the morning mist before the walls of Harrenhal. A runner had been sent the day before to the enemy camp to arrange for a meeting under truce. The Dares and Brackens no doubt expected an attempt at negotiations, but this day would see Rob set the terms, not them. Rob was at the head of a small party trotting away from Harrenhal. "Raise the branch," he ordered. The Nari proudly lifted the long wooden shaft above their heads. Rob had asked the old lord to personally carve a staff and mount a branch of oak leaves to it. Rob watched as Sir Raymond Dare and Lord John Bracken left their camp and approached. "You still live, Lord Stark," Sir Raymond began. "I half expected to meet another man in your armor." Rob kept his face still. This wasn't a meeting of pleasantries. "You called us here, Stark," Lord John said. "State your terms." He let the wind carry Lord Bracken's words away. Rob did not speak, instead he calmly brought his fingers up to his mouth and gave a piercing whistle. The traitors looked to each other, tensing and gripping their reins. No ambush came, only a small group of horses crested the western horizon, coming within shouting distance. Between Stark and Went soldiers, the elderly Lord Dare and young Liman sat, with their hands bound. "Liman!" Sir Raymond yelled, urging his horse forward, only to pull himself back at the last second. "I must commend you, Sir Raymond. Dare Castle is a homely keep." "Well appointed, and very accommodating," Rob said. Lord John stared at Rob in bewilderment. "Now that we understand each other's positions more clearly," Rob continued, "we can properly speak." With a wave of his hand, the hostages were guided back towards the gate of Harrenhal. "Your houses have betrayed King Stannis, and broken the peace of House Tully. You will answer for this, either on the battlefield or at court." Sir Raymond glared at Rob. "I lost 3 brothers to the usurper at the Trident, but King Robert won that war. What makes you think I will stand to follow his accursed brother? You'd follow the king on the hill, a bastard Lannister, instead." Rob pressed. "All kings justify their crowns in one way or another. The Baratheons sit the throne by way of their Targaryen blood, but succession cannot be thrown out on a whim. I no more believe that King Joffrey is born of incest than I do that Jon Arryn was killed by the Lannisters," Raymond replied. Rob snarled, "You doubt my father's own testimony." Lord Jon held up a hand. "Enough," he bellowed. "I will not waste time arguing when there are more important matters to decide." Rob calmed himself. "My terms are simple. You will both lay down your arms. House Bracken will deliver hostages to me and they will be sent to King's Landing alongside the Dares into royal custody. House Bracken could theoretically continue fighting, but without the Dare army, their force was severely weakened. They would be forced to retreat to Stonehenge lest Rob send the minor river lords to capture it. Rob could only hope that Lord John O's was also fearful of whatever hidden advantage Rob had used to capture Castle Direwolf. He may return home to a captured castle. I have already sent messages to Lord Tully, but Rob added as the two lords across grimaced, if you confess that your rebellion was prompted by the Lannisters, through the lies of Petter Baelish, then Lord Tully may be able to argue for less severe reparations. Lord John O scoffed, King Stannis is not a man to grant leniency, you only have to look at the Onion Knight to know that. The king has many enemies, and the North and the Riverlands will gladly deliver his grace a peaceful realm that allows him to focus on matters of greater import. At a certain point, stability takes precedence, Rob told them, but be warned, the Blackwoods will be given their due reparations, and I have not forgotten the men slain at Stonehenge. Raymond took a deep breath, then looked away, back towards his encampment. A bit of sweat pooled along Rob's back. Battle came naturally, these politics did not, but if he could maneuver these men into surrendering, then that was one less threat to his family. The Riverlands could not fall under the Lannisters' influence. Rob looked to Lord John O's and pushed further, there are still armies to be found in the Vale and the Crown lands. I will hold you here as long as I can, and King Stannis will send me reinforcements. My father has hemmed Lord Tywine into the rock. If the old lion was able to break free, do you think he would march into the heart of the Riverlands? Or do you think he would go to aid his allies in Highgarden? The fact was that House Darey and Bracken could not conquer the Riverlands on their own, not unless they could bring most of the lords to their banners, and with the Blackfish now Lord Paramount that would be a difficult proposition. His great-uncle was respected and well-liked with Bran as a young, healthy, unwed heir. Whatever funds or promises had bribed these men, it was not endless, the Lannisters could not buy the whole of the Riverlands. If Raymond said as he turned back to face Rob, if we agreed to concede and revealed what we knew about King Joffrey's schemes, I would only ask that your hostages were sent elsewhere than King's Landing. Rob tamped down his elation, that can easily be arranged. May I ask why? Lord John O spoke up, there are tales of riots and fighting in the city. That accursed Red Faith has swelled and their priests have begun fighting with the sects. That bodes ill, Rob said. The North knew firsthand what the Faith of the Seven was capable of when roused to anger. I will see that alternate arrangements be made to ensure the hostages' safety. Rob saw the light of defiance dim in Raymond and John O's eyes. Both lords relaxed into their saddles and even their guards settled. We will take our own counsel, and prepare an answer, Raymond said. We will meet here again tomorrow. Rob nodded. I look forward to it, sir. // Chop them down, the warrior growled. The men around him walked hesitantly forward, axes in hand. Their boots sunk into the soft ground, forcing each one to struggle with every step. The first to reach the white bark trees steadied himself and brought his axe up but paused. Now, the warrior yelled. On instinct born from a life at sea, the man swung down and cut into the tree, sending splinters and crimson sap across his hands. The violence spurred the others to action, as they were trained to. The warrior crossed his arms, covering the kraken emblazoned on his chest, watching intently as the first of the accursed trees tilted and was finally thrown down into the muck. When you're done, divide the logs into firewood, he instructed. Lord Captain, a boy with thick scars on his face, approached from the causeway. Simic was one of Newt the Barber's favorites, which spoke to his competency. Victorian threw his chin up to acknowledge the boy, but kept his eyes fixed on the trees. Newt sent me with word that Nerid, Black Whip, and Opal Oric all passed in the night, Simic said. Vikmar and Tall Samhain aren't likely to last the day either. Sending his eyes to the sky, Victorian kept the curses and anger to himself. In front of his crew nothing could faze him, nothing could give him pause, not even another batch of men withering away to corpses. Find out where their rations are, he told the boy, have them burned. The bogmen have gotten to them. Victorian noticed the pinch of the boy's face, probably wondering how many casks of water and bags of food had been thrown out for fear of poison. Victorian knew the exact figure, and it was higher than his crew believed. Simic bowed and ran off to one of the tall towers that covered Moat Cailin, leaving Victorian in silence. Before the Iron Fleet took to the sea, Victorian had sat before his brother, his king, while Bolon laid out his plan. As Lord Captain, Victorian would sail down the Salt Spear and take Moat Cailin from the undefended northern side, cutting off the Starks in the south from returning home. His niece, Asher, would take Deepwood Motte by way of Sea Dragon Point. Their brother, Aaron Damfair and Dagmar Cleftjaw were sent to harry the Stony Shore, drawing defenders away from the keeps and towns. Bolon had convinced the War Council that the north was ripe for reaving. Their armies and leaders were fighting for the Burning Stag in the south. And the Iron Fleet had been rebuilt, a slow and tedious work that was finally complete. They'd been set back when a large force of their sailors had disappeared while gathering lumber under Stark's nose, and Bolon had ordered no more voyages be made to the north. The king needed no words to convince him. Victorian had been straining at the bit to be unleashed. It had been too long since he'd been able to embrace the old ways of his people. Forced to avoid the fat cogs of the Reach and Dawn to slip beneath the Iron Throne's notice. Restricted to mere piracy on what vessels they could catch in the summer and narrow seas. His men were made to rove the coasts, and take whatever the rivers touched. Bolon was always the cleverest of them. He had waited and prepared. The merchants were given leave to ply their trade. But when the Kraken rose, all the Ironborn would be forced to remember what their blood sang for. Some would resist, the ones who had grown fat and soft on traders' tits, but Bolon would make them remember that it was lesser men who paid the gold price, and they would pay it to their rightful masters one way or the other. With the fat stag dead and the Greenlanders in turmoil, it was time for the Greyjoys to seize their destiny. For Westeros to remember why they feared the old way and the sons of the drowned god. Aaron was obedient, and happy to spread the word of their god. Victorian never trusted priests, not when they'd put aside gold, women and wine for a rocky life of solitude. Damfair was just as likely to get distracted drowning men rather than looking to the next village. It's why he sent Cleftjaw to keep their raiders moving and focused. Asher was enthusiastic, looking to prove her mettle in true war. His niece was still trying to be the fourth son Bolon never bred. Her chances were non-existent if Theon was found alive and returned to the islands. No one was sure if the boy was already headless, but Bolon had declared independence and Theon's fate would come one way or another. Victorian pitied Asher more than anything. Had she been born a man, she'd have been Lord Reaper after her father. Victorian remembered how the men's spirits had soared when the Iron Fleet unmoored from Pike. The Salt Spear was calm and what few villages dotted the shoreline burned fast and bright, adding the first of many thralls and salt wives to his holds. Their first stumble was after disembarking. The Ironborn counted on bypassing the natural defences. It was common knowledge that the moat was an ancient crumbling mess. Whatever fortifications remained faced the south, leaving the defenders back exposed, and Bolon had been confident the castle had become even weaker in recent years, as Stark spent his coin on digging a new pond or some other nonsense by Winterfell. Victorian was going to strangle whoever told Bolon that lie. The moat's northern face was no great fortress, true, but it had a newly built curtain wall and a fortified gatehouse. The defenders were small and stunted but used deadly, poisonous arrows. They fought under the Direwolf banner and some green symbol of their own. Victorian had been forced to send his men into the swamps to gather wood and discarded stone to make ladders and ramps. Over 3 days, they scaled the walls and inch by inch killed their way through the many towers. The Northmen, who he learned were Crannog men from the neck, fled rather than fight to the end. Victorian's problems were only just beginning. A week later, a fire broke out in one of the towers, then men began falling ill, the latrines were infested with snakes, and weapons began going missing. His army began whispering of ghosts and northern spirits. The few raiders he'd sent out to pillage came back with good loot but warnings of mustering men and an unknown road heading east in the direction of White Harbor. Victorian had no word from Asher, but Dagmar had sent a band of his boys up the river with his takings and tales of fierce fighting with horsemen from House Riswell. What were the Rillmen doing in the Stony Shore? Finish by nightfall. Victorian ordered his axemen, then store the wood under canvas, we'll find a use for it. Victorian knew his orders would be followed, so he strode off, finding his way back to the sturdy tower he had claimed as his own. He had his supper, carefully tested by some expendable men, and drank enough grog to lull him to sleep. His dreams were dark things, drenched in shadows and moonlight. Storm clouds swirled around him as whispers fell like raindrops into his ears. He awakened fitfully throughout the night, sweating and cramped. Finally, after hours of turning, he abandoned his bed before the sun rose and walked the battlements in the dark. He came across a lone man above the northern gate sitting on a stool, a bow set to his side and a small lantern by his foot. The guard did not stir at Victorian's footsteps, he remained hunched over. From the dim glow, Victorian noticed the long straw-colored hair flowing over the man's shoulder. Victorian growled, falling asleep on duty would normally earn you a few days chained to the oars. On dry land, it meant a quick beating. Just the thing to ease his frustrations. Wake up, Horson. Victorian loomed over the lackwit. He did not stir. Victorian frowned, raised his foot and kicked out. The man fell sideways, landing hard on his shoulder. The lamplight washed over his chest and revealed the blood-stained neck and chest of old Tawny, a veteran of many decades. His throat had been open long enough for the blood to soak and clot. Victorian looked left and right, scanning every inch of the wall he could see. Nothing moved but ever so faintly. Victorian could hear the scratching of rats. Forward slash 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 forward slash. The Lord Captain did not sleep again that night, or the day after. He went to his bed as little as possible over the next week. He had the moat searched from the lowest crevice to the highest roof. No trace or trail was found of old Tawny's killer. Some men mumbled that old Tawny was disliked, and known to be a cheat at dice. They suggested his debts had caught up with him, though none came forward to confess to the deed. Victorian did not trust it. To relax himself, he led raid after raid against the closest villages. Northerners died or were taken prisoner and sent to the fleet anchored in the Fever River, a small distance west of Moat Cailin. Victorian was able to send his first ship full of plunder back to the Iron Islands. Boulogne would be pleased, and soon demand more. A demand Victorian worried he would struggle to meet. Every settlement within a day's march had already been sacked, but if he sent his men to more distant targets, they were straying dangerously far from their fortifications. The captains of the Iron Fleet were of split opinion on where their invasion should lead next. The brashest men clamored to attack White Harbor, the foolish ones had set their eyes on Seaguard, and the outliers wanted to strike south against the Westerlands and Riverlands. If Victorian had thousands more men, he'd gleefully unleash the Iron Fleet across the Seven Kingdoms. He was shackled by reality. Yet the captain that ignored his officers was the first to be thrown overboard. A lesson Victorian learned from his father Quayan. They had to be placated, as only Ironborn could be. Victorian called the captains and crews of the Iron Fleet to the courtyard at the center of the fortress, the square, they had nicknamed it. The sun was setting and the skies were clear, so he ordered a bonfire be built and a few large casks of ale be opened. As the white logs of the weirwoods were set ablaze, the music and singing began, and with revelry came challenges, fist fights, wrestling and shooting. Victorian sat on a chair brought out from the tower, his own mug full of ale, watching silently as his men unwound. He could not enjoy himself, could not loosen the cord wrapped tight around his gut. His eyes were drawn to the dark windows circling the square. Was there someone slinking in the shadows? Hiding just out of sight? He tracked a pair of cats skirting around the gathering, watching the men caress and stumble. Had he seen them before? Were these the same mouses that ran about the stables and storehouse? Did they make their beds in his tower, near his rooms, where he discussed his plans? Lord Captain. Victorian snapped forward, locking eyes on the captain standing before him. One of the fairer winds of lonely light, judging by his sealskins and tusk necklace. Speak. Victorian leaned back into his chair. Have you made your decision, Lord Captain? Fairer Wind asked, where shall we go next? The question earned a roar from the crowd, as everyone still sober enough to stand turned to hear Victorian's answer. If this were another place and time, Victorian would have put the Fairer Wind into the dirt, bloody and bruised, maybe missing a finger or two. The only reason he escaped a beating was his question provided an excuse to make his commands known. Victorian stood and approached the captain, who breathed shakily as Victorian placed his large black glove on his shoulder. What's your name, Captain Fairer Wind? Victorian asked. Ilgan, my lord. Victorian nodded and swept his gaze over the crews and captains. Captain Ilgan Fairer Wind, he bellowed, raising his mug, I will give you the honor of receiving a new heading. Every man in the clearing cheered, even the ones flopped on the floor. 40 of the bravest, thirstiest crews we have will take to the Salt Spear, and sack everything the Barrowlands has to offer, and after that, the Rills. Victorian shouted. The square erupted in a wave of cheers, the men drank their mugs dry and went for more, the musicians struck up the opening chords to Grey Sails, a song every Ironborn learns as a child. We'll stock our larders with meat and grain, enough to feed us for a whole season, Victorian boasted. We'll return home with gems and rings on our hands, and each one of you will take home a salt wife with noble blood. His audience went into a frenzy. Singing, dancing, shouting. They declared what castle they would sack, what lords they would kill. Their blood ran hot, and Victorian planned to send almost half of them off to stake their hunger on the north. After all, if mud-eaters from the swamp could hold the moat against the Ironborn, then 50 ships worth of reavers could hold it against whatever siege came, if a siege came at all. He never even considered asking Balon for more orders. If his brother wanted the Iron Fleet to strike somewhere specific, he would let them know. For now Victorian had things well in hand. Like as not, the Northerners would probably hold up in their castles, pissing their pants and praying to their trees that Victorian did not stir from his walls. They wouldn't dare strike at him, not while Asher and Aaron were pillaging their coastline. Newt the barber emerged from the crowd and quickly made his way to Victorian's side. "We found one of them," Newt said as he leaned close. "Who?" Victorian asked. Newt grinned, "A bogman." Victorian threw his mug into the fire and stormed out of the gathering, Newt on his heels. "Where did you nab the little fucker?" Victorian asked. Borskin was taking a piss from the top of a tower when he saw the sneak climb the outer wall, Newt explained. "He climbed the wall." Newt threw a hand up. "Beats me, maybe his father fucked a frog." Victorian smiled wide. "We'll see how well he can climb with broken legs." Newt chuckled and guided them to a small building nestled between the towers. Victorian shoved the door open. A few lamps sat around the interior. Borskin, the pisser himself, was leaning against the back wall. He was a rough-looking man, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, and he had enough hair on his body to knit a cloak, but none of it was on his scalp. Sitting down at a table was the boy, Simic, nursing a goblet of something dark. The frog in question was crumpled in the corner. By the amount of blood pooling from his mouth, he'd already been worked over, and his hand was a mess of flesh and bone. Victorian took a deep breath. "Did you actually ask any questions before putting your boots to him?" "He tried to cut his own throat before we nabbed him," Simic said, "never stopped struggling and kept trying to run. Almost got out the window before Borskin took a mallet to his hand." "Bogman, listen close," Victorian addressed the wretch. "You tell me where to find your lord, and you can meet your gods quickly and painlessly." He waited a few seconds for the prisoner to turn his bruised face up. Only one eye was visible underneath the drying blood and swollen flesh. "Even if I told you where our camp was," he rasped in a thick accent, "you would have better luck swimming back to your barren islands than navigating the neck." Victorian stayed quiet, weighing if Newt could get more from him with his knives. Shrugging his shoulders, Victorian decided he didn't care. He stood and casually took off his coat and his rings. He cinched up the sleeves of his shirt. "Get us some ale," Victorian ordered Borskin. "No more questions, Captain?" Nate asked. "I've had enough of questions." Victorian leaned down and grabbed the bogman, pulling him to his feet. "What does it matter how? Or why? It'll end the same way." He smashed his fist into the bogman's gut 4 or 5 times, until the prisoner vomited up whatever was in his stomach. "Best to get that out of the way first." Victorian looked back to his audience. "When I'm done, fetch me a rope." // It sure is eye-catching, Captain. We should get one for the Iron Victory. Wrap a few of them around the anchor while we're at it. Victorian basked in his men's good humor as they gathered at the northern gatehouse. The bogman's corpse had been strung up by his feet. The body swayed in the wind above the main gate. For the first time in weeks, Victorian felt his stomach settle. "The swamp folk will think twice before crossing us again," Longwater said. He certainly hoped the frog-eaters got the message. Victorian had more important things to worry about. Vulf Victorian turned to his one-eared bosun. "Tell me again what you heard from the limper." Valf took a second to spit one last time at the corpse before following Victorian back into the fortress. Some of the crew from the Headless Jane went raiding with Red Ralph and his boys. They stole some horses from a farm and went riding. The idiots hadn't looked at a map before galloping straight north on the King's Road. Not too long after they came running back, shouting about an army on the march. Valf paused, eyeing Victorian's back, with wolf banners. Victorian paused. He was tempted to walk back to the gatehouse and hew the bogman's corpse to pieces. Why now? His crews were preparing to leave for their raid on the Barrowlands. Half of them were transporting supplies from the fortress to the fleet at anchor. Their celebrations had lasted 2 days and they had yet to replenish their stores. How many soldiers? He asked. Valf shrugged. I doubt those thick-headed cunts can count their own toes, let alone a column of men. Victorian spun around. Then get out there and find out, he thundered. Valf hastily bowed and sprinted towards the barracks. In a few seconds he had a whole pack of sailors following him to the stables. He spent the next few hours rousing the hungover crews into readiness. The walls had to be manned, arms and armor checked, watches set and rations set aside. Victorian was an old hand at raising castles, not guarding them. Boulogn's first rebellion had gone down in smoke once the sieges started. Simic. Victorian called out. The boy emerged from one of the towers, a new golden torque around his neck. Yes, Lord Captain. Find Newt, you're taking 50 men and heading west to the Fever River. I want competent hands guarding the fleet. Send the supply runners back here. Simic and Newt left as the sun reached its peak. Victorian checked with his sentries and there had been no sign of Valf. Victorian took his supper in his chambers, comfortable now that the cats had been caught. He was finally alone. He was not so lucky in his sleep. He found himself wandering the old goat paths of Pike, one of his favorite trails from boyhood. From the side of the rocky hillock he could see the thatched roofs of Lordsport and smell the wafts of smoke from the forges. Victorian felt a tremble and looked down. The pebbles and stones at his feet were vibrating, sliding towards the edge of the path. He pressed backwards, digging his fingers into the hillside for stability. He felt the earth churn under his palms, and a white root burst from the hill, twisting around his wrist and slithering up his wrist. He reached for a weapon but more roots erupted, locking around his arms, legs and waist. Victorian struggled and screamed, but his strength had left him. His thick arms shrank, his skin wrinkled as his hair fell from his face and then his head. All the vigor and fire that fueled his life was sapped dry, leaving only cold ash in his belly. He blinked his blurry and crusted eyes as the earth churned one last time. A face of bark with bloody tears revealed itself, and slowly turned to meet his gaze. Victorian waited but the face only watched as his vision grew dimmer until darkness finally took him. Lord Captain. A banging on his chamber door shocked Victorian back to life. His sheets were soaked through and his keg had spilled across the floor. He stumbled over, yanking the door open to find Valf One Ear. He saw the sun rising through his window's shutters. About time you returned, Victorian snarled. What did you find? Valf swallowed. An army, Lord Captain. The North has come. Victorian slammed the door closed and threw on his armor. He hastily left the tower, Valf in tow. Moat Cailin was abuzz as every Ironborn still standing rushed back and forth. Victorian watched arrows being shoved into barrels and carried up the walls. Axes and swords, freshly sharpened, were handed back to their owners. Valf followed him up to the top of the battlements, where Victorian had ordered the banner of House Greyjoy be raised high. Most of the senior captains were already gathered there. Victorian looked out across the wet mud and stone that filled the field in front of his fortress. The narrow road that snaked across what little solid ground could be found led from the grey stone of the moat to tall, colourful banners and the soldiers carrying them. Mirishai. Victorian called out. The bronze tube was slapped into his hand and he drew it up and scanned the distant enemy. Footmen with mail and spears, horses and wagons, even men in full plate. Where was this force coming from? The North's strength was supposed to have gone south with their lord and heir. The Stark's direwolf flew tall and proud, crowded by the idiotic sigils of their bannermen. If Clefture and Damfair have any sense they'll be burning down every hamlet they can find, Red Ralph Stonehouse said. Imond Harlaw spat over the battlement. If little Asher hasn't already taken Deepwood Mott she should have an easy time of it now. Victorian's next orders were on his lips when he noticed the wind pick up, blowing the rope affixed to the gatehouse up into the clear air. A rope no longer wrapped around a dead man's legs. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Notes. A forward slash N, and we're back. Thank you for your patience. We see that Robb may have found a path to safety in the Riverlands, but can he negotiate a peace? We see how well the Ironborn invasion of the North is going. Victorian is now stuck in Moat Cailin and Sansa has arrived with the rest of the North's strength, but will the rest of the kingdom be able to hold off Asher and Aeron? C&C is always appreciated. Chapter 50, Songs of Conquest, Part 3. Chapter text. Sansa sat in the warmth of her tent. A well-made leather and canvas covering that Maester Lewin had found in storage. It had been commissioned by Grandfather Ricard for the tourney at Harrenhal. Lord Sewin, inform me when Lord Reed arrives. Lord Major Cruin nodded from a large table set up for her advisors. Of course, Lady Stark, I will alert the sentries. Sansa knew better than to try and direct military matters, but a Stark needed to be present to oversee the muster of so many troops and mediate disputes. Good. Lord Locke, have the shepherds found a godswood nearby? Oliver Locke looked up from his conversation with one of his captains. I believe they are close, my lady. One of theirs, Yorick, is leading the search. Sansa thanked her men, then stood and donned one of her larger coats. It was made of heavy red wool, trimmed with white fox fur, embroidered with fine threads depicting the wolf's wood. It was one of Smalljan's more extravagant name-a-day gifts, sent from last hearth with his family's compliments. She missed Smalljan, her romantic giant. He had written to her as often as able, but war-made personal ravens from the south a rare sight. She stepped out of the tent into the chilled air, a hint of snowflakes floating high above her head. Lady Sansa Meera Reed greeted her from a campfire across the way. The newly arrived Crangewoman had refused to stay behind. Her other friends, Omer and Edara, had remained in Winterfell. Sansa had put up a token protest, but she'd been relieved to have some companionship on the march. Meera, any idea when your father will find us? Sansa asked. Meera looked up to the sky. Soon, I imagine. My brother has likely warned him of our arrival. Sansa whistled, and from behind the tent lady emerged. Her wolf was large and graceful, though she would never grow to match Grey Wind, and Ghost had quickly eclipsed both of them before Jon left for the gift. Lady was the best behaved of her siblings though, and unlike Shaggy Dog, Lady could be brought inside without fear for the furniture. Lady followed Sansa and Meera to the camp outskirts, where the footmen and cavalry set their berths. Sansa watched as a group of soldiers in rough clothes and furs went about constructing a small stake line of sharpened timber, while wagons were emptied and brought forward to act as a wall facing the moat. Her army had stopped and taken 3 days to rest and construct their camp. The Ironborn had not stirred. The only time Sansa had even seen the invaders was when a volley of arrows fell on some scouts that approached the castle. The sight of their banners brought her thoughts to Theon. With all that had happened in the south, she had nearly forgotten about him. Robb had meant to send for him after the war began, but his messages to White Harbor were delayed. They were told Theon had left the harbor to serve a short stint on a trusted merchant vessel and had not yet returned. Last they heard he was still away when Robb departed. Sansa was thankful that Theon had not been made to return to Winterfell. Who knows what she may have been forced to do if the Greyjoy heir was in her custody during the invasion, what the Northern Lords would demand she do. She would pray Theon was safe at sea, and that the captain he sailed with held the Ironborn no particular ill will. Do you think they are waiting for something? Sansa asked Meera. Meera shook her head. They may not think we have the numbers to drive them out. Lady sat down, never taking her gaze off the moss-caked walls in the distance. I sent word for Dustin and Ryswell to search their shores. Steward Poole believes the Greyjoy fleet must still be anchored here in the north, Sansa explained. If that's true, then the Ironborn may try to flee back to their ships. Meera carefully rubbed the bronze medallion hanging around her neck. Let's return to the tent, I want to speak with a shepherd, Sansa decided. As the two of them turned, Lady remained. Lady. Sansa stepped over and ran a hand through her soft fur. Lady gave a deep growl as she stepped in front of Sansa. Meera followed Lady's gaze. Her eyes widened. The moat is opening. Sansa had only a moment to see the gate rise before a swarm of soldiers enveloped her. "Lady Sansa!" Dons cried as she was brought back to the camp center. "Next time, please allow me to give you an escort if you're leaving the camp." "Dons, I took Lady and Mira with me," Sansa muttered. The Master-at-Arms had a habit of acting as her minder since they left Winterfell. "What is happening?" she questioned. A group of Ironborn made a break through the front gate on horseback. They headed west. "Lord Waterman is leading a pursuit," Dons explained as they settled back in Sansa's tent. "Lord Sawin," Sansa began, drawing his attention to her, "I would like to present terms of surrender to the Ironborn." This had been an ongoing argument between the two of them, starting from before they left Winterfell. The old axeman frowned. "Lady Sansa, as I told you before, no Ironborn would surrender willingly. Especially without being blooded first." Frustrated, Sansa strode to her desk and pulled out the silver seal bearing the Direwolf and House words. Brandishing the seal, she held it out towards Lord Sawin. "Until my father or brother return, I am responsible for acting in their stead, and I firmly believe they would support me," she argued. "We still await Mandaily and Reed. Speaking under truce will not harm our position, and we need to keep the Ironborn in one place. If they choose to scatter, or flee south, we'll never catch them." Lord Sawin considered her words. Sansa gave one last push. "The honor of House Stark did not fly south with my father." Lord Sawin took a deep breath. "You are correct, Lady Sansa. Though I fear we already know what the answer will be." Sansa walked over and laid a hand on the old lord's shoulder. She gave him a kind smile. "It doesn't matter if our offer is rejected. What matters is that we have the integrity to make it." "Well said." Sansa turned and saw the compliment came from a shorter man, dressed in green wool with a lizard lion hide wrapped around his shoulders and a cane in his hand. Mira was hugging him tightly. "Lord Reed," Sansa curtsied. "Please, Lady Sansa." Howland Reed held a hand up. "No need for such deference on my account. Your father and I are close friends." "Sit, my lord." Sansa motioned for a servant to bring bread and salt. "All of Winterfell was glad to hear that you had survived the attack on the moat." Lord Reed settled into the offered chair and gratefully sipped from a freshly filled cup. "So was I, though I lost many good men in doing so," he replied. "How many men have you left, Lord Reed?" Lord Sawin wondered. 200 armed and fit for duty. I've spread them around the neck and have them patrolling the waterways. I've also assigned my best to sabotage the enemy. From what they report, already a few dozen have fallen to illness or accident," Reed reported. Sansa could see the way Dons and others frowned at Lord Reed's chosen tactics. She could admit the idea of poison and assassination did not sit well with her. "Do you know who leads the Ironborn?" Lord Locke asked. Reed swallowed a mouthful of bread. "The Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet himself, Victorian Greyjoy." The men sucked in harsh breaths. "A black-hearted monster," Lord Sawin commented. "He led the burning of Lannisport and wet the seas with blood until King Stannis smashed his fleet at Fair Isle. I wonder who captains the raids along the coast?" Dons asked. "The islands do not lack for bloodthirsty men," Lord Reed told them. "The brother of Balon will not give up the castle without a fight," Lord Locke concluded. "We must still try," Sansa insisted. "I want a raven sent with terms." One of the stewards brought out a fresh sheet of parchment and refilled his quill. Sansa sat down with Lord Reed and Mira as the commanders discussed under what circumstances they would accept the Ironborn surrender. According to custom, they would be held as prisoners. The commoners would be given the choice of the block or the wall, and the nobles would be held as hostages until arrangements could be made with Balon Greyjoy. With the chaos on the mainland, Sansa doubted any form of armistice would come quickly. In a clean hand, Sansa signed the offer and drew out the seal ring of House Stark to finalize the message. She pressed the ring into the pooling wax. The direwolf stared back at her. It was her first true declaration. It was a piece of paper that carried her name, and the ink of her name carried the authority of her father, and the authority of her father was built with the brick of ancient crowns and the mortar of uncountable generations. All that power rested in her hands at the moment. If the Ironborn could not be routed, then her hands would carry that stain. The first Stark to lose the gateway of the neck in living memory. Not even Torrhen Stark had allowed the Targaryens to capture the moat. Could she bear that embarrassment? The people of the North may consider it a symptom of her sex. A woman failing where a man would have been victorious. She worried for a moment of the consequences. Would the Umbers break her betrothal? Would she be sent away from Winterfell to better hide the shame? Sansa sat alone in the tent. The lords had left to prepare and Mira had taken her father to settle him into the camp. Even Dons had stepped out to chastise the men who allowed her to wander unguarded. Only Lady remained, curled up by her feet. Taking a moment, she leaned her head back and squeezed her eyes shut. No tears fell, but she allowed herself a moment to wish desperately that her mother was beside her. Forward slash 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 forward slash. I hope I'm not imposing, my lady. Lord Reed had approached her at the archery range 2 days later. A few of Don's men were nearby watching and talking. She was keeping her hands occupied with the bow instead of pacing in her tent. The Marndalis were less than a day's ride away, and once the moment arrived, the siege would begin in earnest. Of course not, Lord Howland. Sansa set her quiver down. How can I be of service? Lord Reed took a second to observe her. How much do you know, my lady, of the shepherds and their concerns? Sansa stood still for a brief moment, her eyes wandering the field. No one was near, and her guards were seeing who could throw pebbles the farthest. I know that my brother, John, witnessed a pact made by the great shepherd, she revealed, a pact made with a man of the far north. There was more she could say, about her nightmares of cold hands and star-bright eyes, or her time spent with Maester Lewin compiling reams and reams of supply counts and filling out ration tables or schedules for one last planting. Lord Reed smiled, relieved. I am glad. If I learned anything from Robert's rebellion, it is that knowledge hoarded can become knowledge lost. The Lord of Greywater Watch looked up to the sky, tracking a flock of birds overhead. The shepherds have found a godswood nearby, an old one. I wonder if you would have time to escort me there. I wish to pray. Sansa graciously accepted. She bid the Stark men report to Dons. Lord Reed's guards would see them safely to the godswoods. It was a pleasant ride, only half an hour from the camp. Lady kept pace at her side, and she suspected the flock of birds above were keeping a watch of their own. They came upon a dense collection of tall boulders at the base of a squat hill. 2 figures in green cloaks stood at the edge, watching their approach. It was the first time Sansa had seen shepherds with swords and spears. Sansa dismounted and returned the bows of the shepherds. Lord Reed slipped between the boulders and led them in a curving path that spiraled inward in a long loop. Lady had to be pushed to fit between a few of the tighter passages. Are these boulders natural? Sansa observed how neat and orderly the rocks aligned. Lord Reed laid a hand against the rock. Who can say? These stones have stood for thousands of years, likely longer. Though I would not be surprised if the hands of the children guided their placement. My brother told me he was going north at the behest of the children, to search for something called the Three-Eyed Crow. His last message mentioned a dangerous journey beyond the wall, but he did not mention if they found the bird. They finally rounded one last corner and had to duck under a piece of stone. Sansa held her breath as she took in this hidden home of the gods. It was a small crater, sunken into the earth at such a depth that the sloped ground was closer to a steep climb. There were no other trees but the most important one. A single white-barked cylinder dug deep into the crater's center. It had an enormous base with fat, heavy roots visible beneath the topsoil. It was not tall, its branches lacked the volume and reach that made Winterfell's heartree stand as a crowned king among the godswood boughs. This stout tree had a meager offering of stubby branches and barely any leaves to its frame. She could not make out a face on the weirwood. The wind ran strangely through this place. It whistled and whined between the boulders, swirling at the base of the tree. It sent her hair twisting across her face as the breeze sailed past her ears. Sansa thought she could make out songs and words in those brief moments. Lord Reed took careful steps down, stepping over roots as he came across them. Sansa followed, worried that the man might stumble and fall. Lady gracefully hopped ahead of them, balancing on roots wider than kegs of ale. Her wolf slipped out of sight as Lord Reed stopped to catch a breath. Have you ever met a child of the forest, Lord Reed? Sansa asked. Lord Reed tapped his cane gently against his palm. I have a touch of green sight that comes and goes. When I was a younger man, I dreamed of a child leading my horse out of the swamp down to a great lake where a weirwood grew from a whirlpool he nostalgically described. I was so convinced that this was a message from the old gods that I disobeyed my parents and slipped into the Riverlands unnoticed and spent a winter on the Isle of Faces. Sansa was amazed. What did you find there? Lord Reed glanced at her, then his eyes drifted up into the boughs of the heartree. I found nothing I expected, and more than I could understand. Sansa looked up. Her eyes widened, her mouth pinched closed. Lounging between the bare branches was a person, or something like a person. Tiny in stature, their face was honey brown, smooth and lacquered. Swirls of bark protruded from the skin, marking out cheeks and a chin. A long braid of thistle and vines fell from its head across its shoulder. Striking red eyes ran across Sansa and Lord Reed. The child of the forest, for Sansa reasoned it could be nothing else, slipped around the other side of the tree. She followed Lord Reed's example and cautiously stepped down to the base of the weirwood. Sansa was pleasantly surprised to see Lady, patiently sitting and waiting. The child was sitting amongst the branches using them as a hammock. Lord Reed was smiling as he bowed his head. Sile, Alpha. Alpha, the polite term for the children, meant Earthchild. It was the closest translation Bourne had for the word, though he insisted that the children of the forest had 100 different names for themselves. Most that men could not say. Sile, Trother, the child politely answered. Their voice was smooth and light, closer to a bird call than a woman's voice. Trother, Wanderer, was a name Sansa was more familiar with. In ancient tales the Trother was a young traveler who would arrive at a place, face challenges and gain new wisdom before being granted a boon and moving on to another adventure. Slowly, the child's eyes drifted over to Sansa, seemingly unimpressed. The child looked bored, Sansa thought. She had never considered that a being of myth could be bored. This would be the Direwolf that you spoke of? They asked Lord Reed. Sansa blinked. Red Wolf. She knew her hair was distinctive, but really. Lord Reed took a moment to sit down against the weirwood. Yes, Alpha, she leads her people while her family is scattered to the north and south. The child ran a thin finger along their chin, a heavy burden. One she has carried without hesitation, Lord Reed added. Sansa pushed down her urge to insert herself into the conversation. Lord Reed was no enemy of hers, and this seemed to be a meeting rather than an ambush. She took a deep breath and decided she would place her trust in father's friend. Direwolf, you are preparing to fight the Lyf Furflod who have crossed into your lands? The child asked, each word lifted off their tongue without care. Sansa's eyebrows drew together. Lyf Furflod. Men. Of. Tides. Do you mean the Ironborn? The child's tongue clicked. The Lyf Flood came with the rest of your ancestors, when your people could barely claw air and other metal from the earth's flesh. They carved crude oaken vessels and followed us up the rivers to the seas. They always attacked with the arrival of the tide. The child picked a piece of stick out of its strange robe and threw it at Sansa. It missed and landed softly in the dirt. Enough of your questions, you will answer mine. Do you really plan to fight the Lyf Flood? A tiny girl like yourself. Do you plan to bargain with the Lyf Flood? Pay tribute to them in hopes they will leave? Sansa stepped forward, crushing the stick underfoot. Of course not. She shouted, they'll get no tribute from Winterfell, they will leave my father's lands with their lives and nothing else. To imply anything else was an insult to every strand of her spirit. The child appeared unmoved by her declaration. They slumped back against the tree and let one leg hang down from their seat. Frustration that had cooled over days of sitting within sight of the Kraken banner spilled over. Anger fed by every report of burnt hamlets, dead villagers left to rot in their homes, and countless other acts of unbearable cruelty. Every lord and lady in the West could speak about the Ironborn. Of ancient woes and crimes, or even more recent murder and depravity. It was clear to Sansa that the Iron Islands had not come to conquer the North but to violate it, and steal all that could be taken. Vultures of the worst kind, for they did not search for carrion but made their own corpses. If I had the training and the body, I would pick up a sword and drive them into the swamps myself. We would take back our castle and cut down any of the scum who stood in our way. I'd order my men to take their heads, down the wall. I'd set Lady loose among them so Victorian Greyjoy himself would finally know what it was to be helpless and hunted, and, her breath came hard and fast, her face was flush with blood. Her eyes finally found the face of the heart-tree. It was carved over top a bulge in the trunk, making the face loom down on her. The eyes were deep-set and the nose flat and wide, the mouth had a drooping lower lip. The face looked hungry, ravenous. I would hang them from the boughs of the weirwoods. They don't deserve the burial at sea their god desires. Let them repay their debt to the north with blood, she finished. As her pulse calmed, she turned and found Lord Reed leaning heavily on his cane, watching her closely. The child had sat up at some point and had a small smirk. Before she could shrink in embarrassment at her outburst, the child let out a keening sound as its shoulder shook. Were they laughing? Direwolf is a proper name for you, it seems, the child told her, a name for the spirit if not the body. They pushed off the branch and fell gently down to the ground, almost lifted by a breeze. My kin had a habit of doling out favors and gifts when you men followed their wishes. The child stepped closer. They were a small creature, whose head only came up to her chest. My dealings with your people have been few and far between. Each time they have disappointed me. I agreed to meet with you because your brother, the Direwolf, has done a great service to our elders, and the Trother, they gestured to Lord Reed, has proven to have some splinter of wisdom. John? Sansa asked, for which other of her brothers would be called White Wolf? The child glared at her for interrupting. We are talking about you, girl. Unlike my kin, I have no desire to see you dance to my tune. Instead, I will grant you a boon and you will use it to succeed or fail. It is much more interesting this way. Lord Reed was frowning, but gave a subtle nod from the corner of her eye. Sansa took a deep breath and curtsied. Then I humbly accept whatever aid you are willing to give me. When she looked up, the child was back lounging in the weirwood branches, staring up at the clouds. In 4 days we shall sing a song to the waters of the neck, the child told her. I will open you a path, but as always, you must be the one to walk through it. Sansa felt Lady come to her side. She knelt to pet the wolf, who seemed completely at ease around the child. How will a path help us defeat the invaders? Sansa pondered. She turned to find the tree empty. Where did they go? Sansa asked aloud. Lord Reed pushed himself to his feet. That particular alpha has never been polite company, but they were a very persistent mentor of mine when I was young. On the Isle of Faces. Sansa was impressed that Lord Reed had been personally taught by a child of the forest. The wind blew through the godswood, each giant stone added a strange melody to the air. This was a strange place, not calm and serene like Winterfell's wood. Come, Lady Sansa, let us return to the camp, Lord Reed suggested. Sansa walked over and began helping the older man climb over the huge roots. It seems we have 4 days to plan our attack. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Victorian Greyjoy has sent a response. The commanders of the north were gathered around a roaring fire. Their camp had swelled with the arrival of Sir Marlon Mardaily and his army. Sansa organized a small feast to welcome the last of the men and begin the planning for their assault. Everyone agreed that siege weapons would be too costly and difficult to construct in the desolate neck. I'm surprised there's anyone among them who can ride, Lord Locke joked. The men laughed and drank from their wine. Sansa was seated with Mira and Lord Reed, watching the celebration and speaking with her vassals. Lord Sewin, what did Lord Captain Greyjoy have to say? Sansa asked. Her advisor stood before the crowd and unrolled a piece of parchment. Sansa realized it was simply the reverse side of her initial message. Lord Sewin frowned heavily, then coughed. My lady, this message is not worth the ink it was written with. Vulgar words from a dishonorable hand. Sansa sat straighter. I can handle the words of our enemies, my lord, for I have no doubt they are cruel and baseless. The commanders quieted, all looking to Lord Sewin. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. To the young Stark. Worry not your pretty head over these matters of war. I will sally out of my fortress soon and put your Greenlander lords to the sword. I will come to Winterfell with axes and spears to tear down the walls of your Greenlander ancestors. Then once I have taken your lands for all their wealth and filled my halls with salt wives and thralls, I shall take you to my bed and sire a pack of pups to rule the north in my name like a hawking of old. We do not so. Lord Captain Victorian Greyjoy, master of the Iron Victory. The men roared in anger and offense. Songza's cheeks flushed in embarrassment and outrage. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked over at Mira. "He'll regret his words," Songza Mira comforted. Dons kneeled at her feet. "In the name of House Stark, my lady, I'll take the squid's head myself." Songza sighed. "You do my family proud, Dons. Thank you for your defense. Though I must ask that you not put yourself in undue danger to protect my virtue. In the absence of your lord father and your brothers, I believe it falls to me to act as your champion," Dons told her. Dons had become a very serious man in the time he'd served as the master at arms. Songza knew he worried for his brother, Orin. No doubt many of the commanders felt the coming battle would be to gain honor and glory while others fought against the Lannisters. Songza knew that the best way to direct that energy was to acknowledge it, funnel it. Preferably in a way that meant more victories than dead bodies. She had done her own readings into the Stark histories, and though there had been fewer writings by ladies of Winterfell in recent history, there was a storied number of Stark queens who had contributed their own books. Greyjoy's message brought to mind a particular passage that Songza had earmarked back home, the memoirs of Queen Elaena Stark, mother of King Benjen, known as the Jewel of the North. The reign of King Benjen the Sweet began after the coming of the Andals but before the total conversion of the South. His father, Benjen the Bitter, had waged war against the petty kings of the rivers over the Cape of Eagles. The last battle of that war saw his vanguard smashed by the legendary King Tristaifer Formud, the builder of old stones. Benjen the Bitter and all 4 of his brothers were captured and forced by King Tristaifer to take the Black, leaving his young son as king, and his wife, Queen Elaena of House Dustin, as regent. With the unfolding turmoil of the Andal invasion, Queen Elaena needed to bring stability to the north, a difficult task when a child sits the throne. She decided that with no elder Starks to bear arms in her son's name, she would have to find men to keep the peace from elsewhere. During the first harvest feast after young Benjen's coronation, Queen Elaena declared that she was seeking a new husband, but that to be worthy of her hand, the suitor must prove himself a man without reproach. She demanded 4 things as courting gifts: enough food to feed her castle come winter, the heads of 100 bandits, the loyalty of 500 horsemen, and the favor of the old gods. Many Magners knew that to enter the royal household would be to act as the young king's father, a position of influence that even the humble desired. Elaena had spent the year leading up to this feast, corresponding, traveling and charming the many households loyal to her son. Her reputation was beyond reproach, and she made it clear that House Stark's prestige had not been beggared by her former husband. In her own words, the courage of men must be driven by ambition but tempered by reward. Many of the Magners who wished to take my hand were not the sort I would marry. Nevertheless, I gave the greedy the same affection as the earnest, because they each held the power to act in my stead. I did not offer these men riches beyond imagining or the power to remake the world. I put before them the chance to use their skill and be rewarded with influence, all while providing them an honorable cause to ride for. A cause will move mountains, where a bride will move only tongues. It took many years for a suitor to meet her conditions. Time that she spent raising her son in a peaceful north, where houses of all sizes worked to better their farming, raise more cavalry and hunt bandits, while seeking the favor of the gods with just rule and honest work. King Benjen the Sweet got his name by carousing and befriending the men who came to seek his mother's hand, and comforting them when they failed. When Queen Elaena Stark finally married Brune Hartley, after Benjen the Bitter had passed at the wall, she invited all of her former suitors to the wedding and gave each of them a small silver pendant shaped like a tree. A token to show they had competed for her hand. These pendants became heirlooms that many houses still cherished to the present day. Sansa stood up and beckoned Lord Sewin to hand her the message while Dons drew the attention of the commanders. Muir and Lord Reed moved back to give Sansa and Lady the center stage. "My lords and captains," she began, "I stand among fine company tonight. I stand among soldiers who did not shirk from their duty. I stand among those who came when the Stark in Winterfell called. I stand among men who are ready to fight for the North as readily as our kinsmen do in the South." Sansa shouted to a bellow of cheers. Soldiers from nearby tents drifted closer. She took a deep breath. The Ironborn have made a grave error, they have left the safety of their boats and stepped foot upon northern soil. A few more soldiers wandered in from their own fires. "Victorian Greyjoy says he will sally forth soon and put my Greenlander lords to the sword." Sansa held up the parchment. "It seems the sea air has robbed him of his memory. Where were our lords 10 years ago? Young Benfred Tallheart jumped atop his chair, battering down the walls of pike, he screamed. The crowd toasted and cheered for the young man. Sansa raised her hands, in 2 days, we shall strike at these trespassers and thieves. With the blessings of the gods and the keen strategy you will craft tonight, the moat shall be freed. She gestured, and more food and tables were brought out by the camp servants. Men gathered and began discussing. Soon drawings of the moat's current defenses and reports from Lord Reed's scouts were combined to form the basis of their battle plan. Moira leaned close. Do you think the child will actually perform magic for us? Sansa shrugged, I hope so. We will need every advantage we can get. If your father could hold the moat with only a few hundred men caught unaware, I dare not think how long 1,000 reavers, well prepared, could last. She plucked a piece of venison off the table and gently fed it to Lady. Though without knowing what they are capable of, I'm unsure how we'll make the best use of it. Approach it like a lizard lion, then Moira suggested. What? Sansa asked. The older girl smiled. To hunt a lizard lion, you have to set your trap and wait, but unlike most prey you also need to get close for the kill. Their hide is too tough for most arrows. Once the lizard lion has taken the hook, you have to pull it closer, within arm's reach, then strike. Sansa leaned closer. How do we do that here? Moira frowned. Unfortunately, the army must be our hook and bait in one. Pray that the child's promise will give us a line to bring the Ironborn in close. Sansa looked back out to the men carousing. Even if the child was lying, our strength of arms must see us through. One way or the other. The night had gone long, and she was tired. Sansa bid her friend good night. She briefly asked Lord Sewin to summarize any discussion for her in the morning, and to handle any needed preparations for the assault. As Lady and Dons accompanied her to the tent, she couldn't help but look out across the dark mud of the neck where only small fires outlined Moat Cailin. A fortress standing alone amongst the earth and water. For 1,000 years it had protected the north. If the Ironborn were allowed to claim it, their enemies in the south would pay any price to be let through. One crack in the armor and the north would be vulnerable. Sansa would not allow it. She sent for shepherds the night before the bloodshed was to begin. A good dozen had gathered in the camp. They had marched with the lords and levies. Some openly, such as Yorick of Last Hearth, but others came in secret and kept their identities hidden. With Lord Reed mediating, she managed to wrestle a concession of support from them. The lords had looked askance when she entered their tent with shepherds at her back. She deliberately donned a dress of deep green that evening. My lord, Sansa began, I've come to wish you all good fortune tomorrow. I am not learned in the ways of war, but I listened to the lessons of my house. One of the shepherds stepped beside her. They produced a stone bowl filled with red pigment. I would give you the blessings of Stark and gods, both, Sansa said. The fire was stoked low and the smoke drifted and curled between them. Dons, ever loyal, stepped forward first. He knelt before her. Blessing upon you, Dons Argent, may the gods see your courage as House Stark has, she told him, as she dipped her finger into the pigment. Sansa reached down and gently grabbed his hand. She drew a small rune on the inside of his wrist. Summed, honor. The rune she chose denoted valor in battle. After Dons came Lord Sewin and Oliven Locke. Each man stood straighter after their marking. Then came the rest. Even the Mandaelis, though for their sake she instead drew a 7-point star which drew a grateful smile from the knights among them. It was a heady thing, to mark these men as hers. She felt the strings of their loyalty sewn into the tip of her finger. Good Northmen, as you prepare for battle tomorrow. I ask only one favor, she announced. Name it, Lady Stark, Sir Marlon answered. Before you march on the morrow, look to the earth. For the north has ever been a kingdom of soil and roots. It remembers the footsteps of our ancestors who once walked through this very land for this first time in ancient days. It shall not forsake us. The shepherds bowed their heads. The lords did as well. She bid them good night. Forward slash 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 forward slash. They've moved the wagons. The walls of Moat Cailin bristled with men. Victorian had ordered the bulk of his reavers to man the gatehouse and curtain wall. His reserves were spread around the east and west with another strong force waiting at the gate to reinforce it. We all saw that, Valf Newt the barber snooked, the question is what they plan to do next. The causeway is a death trap, we'll rain a storm of arrows on them if they try to approach. We already brought the rubble and timber we used inside, there's not enough out there to build an outhouse, let alone a dry path. Red Ralph was shaving with an old knife. Do you think the Black Shepherd made it to the fleet? Victorian looked up from his meal. He was sitting at a table in the square under a tent they'd found bundled away in the castle storeroom. He better have, we can't risk the fleet being taken at anchor, Victorian said after wiping the gristle from his beard. He's got to crew as many ships as he can and take them back to the Salt Spear and find Dagmar and Aaron. That means we're stuck here. Imond Harlaw protested. Newt scoffed, we're hardly stuck. We've got supplies, thick walls, and if worst comes to worst we put this ruin to the torch and head south. Victorian focused on eating while his men bickered. Some wanted to leave a skeleton guard and slip away into the wilderness, then fall on the northern camp in the night. The older captains wanted to slip away for good, more comfortable within sight of a dock than stuck in a swamp. Victorian's instincts agreed with them, but his pride held him fast. Victorian wasn't going to flee without a fight. If the drowned god favored him, then they would weather the coming assault long enough for Aaron, Dagmar and Asher to rally and attack either Torrens Square or Barrowtown. Burning one of the North's few major hubs would draw their armies like flies to shit, giving Victorian room to breathe. Once we have a way to sail inland, the heart of the North is ours, we should strike at Winterfell, someone said, and that set off a whole other argument. Victorian leaned back from his plate, the sun was just cresting the mists of the neck and peeking over the fortress. His soldiers had sobered with the sight of the direwolf banners, but he had bolstered their spirits when the young bitch had sent her terms. If all that House Stark had to offer was some young chit, then the House of the Wolf was in a sorry state. A flurry of motion caught his eye. Men posted on the gatehouse were yelling, pushing each other and pointing down to the field. Victorian watched as slowly more and more men began moving. Lord Captain? Newt asked, also noticing the strange behavior. Finally, one of the captains on the wall turned to the square and bellowed with a voice made for overcoming the churn of the waves, Lord Captain. Victorian burst from his chair, knocking aside men and tables, sprinting up the nearest tower to reach the battlements. He expected to see something unbelievable, a siege tower, a new army, or even Grumpkins and Snooks. Instead he saw the open causeway with its mud and stone, empty and unmoving. Mirishai. Victorian growled. He scanned across the ground to the northern line. The supply wagons had indeed been moved and he could see the ranks of footmen and archers assembling in front of their camp. What the bloody fuck are you all looking at? Victorian roared. The men around him flinched back, but one of the older raiders with a handful of gold piercings in his ear stepped forward. Lord Captain, the sailor bowed, then leaned against the battlement and pointed down, it's the ground. At the base of Moat Caelin's new wall was an ever-present ring of deep water and sinkholes. Many of his own Ironborn had fallen and drowned in that water. They'd found small strips of solid ground to steady their ladders when they took the fortress. Victorian had set a crew of boys digging out those strips in the weeks since they arrived. Only now, Victorian was not looking at the natural defense of the causeway. He was looking at a dwindling pond. Second by second, the deep waters and muck that surrounded the moat disappeared, the ground underneath appeared to harden as water was sucked away. As if someone had wrung the clay dry. What in the name of the drowned god is this? Victorian's gauntlets creaked as he gripped the stone wall. He could practically taste the panic settling into the soldiers around him. Sailors were superstitious by nature, and it was good form to fear the gods of the world, lest you run afoul of their moods and be sent to your death on their whim. Victorian turned back, orders bursting from his lips. The blast of war horns drowned him out. Across the field the Northmen surged forward with a cry. He drew his sword, ready yourselves. Every man here owes me 10 northern corpses. I don't care how you take them, with blade, arrow, club, fist or teeth. We will open their veins and refill the mire below with Greenlander lifeblood. The Ironborn roared and rushed to the walls. These Northmen wish to take back their sunken ruin. Victorian decided he would barter them, 1,000 corpses for each tower. forward slash 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 forward slash. Sansa would watch the battle from a small platform erected behind a palisade, well beyond the reach of a stray arrow. She stood almost alone but for a few scant guards, fresh-faced men-at-arms sworn to White Harbor and Castle Sewin. The experienced commanders and battle-tested warriors had gone forward to meet their fates on the causeway. She feared the child had lied, maybe deceived them like in old Nan's fables. Moira had woken her early, before the sun rose, to find the field of battle unchanged. Sansa thought perhaps the magic had struck the Ironborn directly, but there was no panic or retreat from their enemy. Sansa had prayed in her tent, a string of emeralds clutched tightly in her fist. She insisted on being near the front line when the call to advance was sounded, to act as a symbol to her men. Many had saluted her as they formed the ranks, shouts of Stark and Winterfell rang in the air from brave throats. Lord Sewin had been about to give the signal, when Sansa felt the ground vibrate. For a scant few moments, she would swear a wave flowed through the air. Disturbing the air, shaking trees, disturbing puddles. It flowed from north to south. The horses startled, and the soldiers halted their muster. No one could quite say what they felt, only that something had shifted. Then a cry from a Flint soldier. He had stepped forward, out of line. The man no doubt expected to be knee-deep in mud for venturing into the marsh, but his feet found only sturdy ground. His fellows and captain followed him, testing the ground with spears and boots. Disbelieving, Lord Sewin sent orders down the line to the mermen to test the ground on the left flank. A fully armored knight walked unimpeded across the terrain. Sansa smiled, an infectious cheer that burst from her very core. A fervent prayer and perhaps an indulgent creature had delivered the Northmen a gift. Now they had to seize it. Stepping off the palisade, Sansa ran out in front of the palisade to Lord Sewin's side. She couldn't help herself. Without thinking, she grabbed the horn on Sewin's belt and yanked it to her lips. With all her breath she blew the long, barreling tone of war. There could be no hesitation. Not now, not against a foe as bloodthirsty as sharks in fresh-churned waters. The horn call was carried up across the army. A great roar followed as the many warriors, who had been prepared to move under concentrated arrow volleys, reformed themselves and surged across the now vast, undefended ground. The Ironborn's response was slow but quickly built into a fervor. Sansa saw the dark shapes occupying the moat thicken in rank along the crenellations. The arrows slowed the advance of her troops, but they were already closing on the walls by then. Thick shields had carried the ladders into position. With the ground dry as bone, her troops had no need to concentrate on one or two specific sections of the wall. They flowed around the curtain wall, which, while impressive and constructed well under Lord Reed's eye, was only effective with the marsh blocking the way past it. It spanned the distance between the two most northerly towers but did not extend any further south. Sansa grinned viciously as the banners disappeared into the heart of the moat and the Ironborn were forced to turn back and face foes on both sides. She looked over at Lady. Her companion was typically calm, gentle. Now though she paced back and forth, her claws dug into the soil, and her tongue spilled from her mouth. The invaders had fallen into the wolf's jaws, now all that was left was to feast. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Victorian cracked skull after skull. He spilled brains and bowels. He roared in defiance. The mummery had been all too real. The very ground beneath his feet had turned against him. They had too few archers to keep the Northmen at bay. He'd ordered the men to block the tower stairways with their shields and bodies. Yet, all the same, the towers had taken the manpower needed to repel the ladders. Axeman tore his bowmen apart. He could hear Red Ralph and Valf One Ear dying in the tower behind him. Already the reavers set along the western wall were fleeing, running back towards the square. Where the fuck they thought they'd go was beyond him. The cravens offered a convenient distraction. He cleaved the head from a greybeard. Spying his crew, he whistled for Newt to rally above the gatehouse. In their rush to sweep over them, the Northmen had left it untouched. Victorian led the group down a small stairway behind the gate. He waited and watched as their foe surged deeper into the moat, drunk on their victory and eager to rip his men from the towers. Seizing a gap, they broke for the west, losing a few men to lucky arrows, but by the time they'd been spied it was too late. Victorian plunged into the drooping trees of the neck. The air was thick with blood and screams. Victorian ignored the exhaustion of his legs and pushed deeper, turning north as soon as the moat was out of sight. "We make for the fleet," he told his men. Only 10 had made it. The sounds of battle faded quickly in the forest. Victorian had no time to reflect, his total focus was needed to navigate the mire beneath him. They crawled across logs, through foul water and under fallen trunks. A hand grabbed his shoulder, Newt with a finger to his lips. The whole party had frozen, eyes scanning the foliage, ears perked for any noise. A minute passed but nothing moved. Victorian exhaled. A man at the back of their party fell forward with bone darts jutting from his neck. The bogmen fell on them. 2 emerged from the water, covered in straw and moss cloaks with long spears, more stepped from behind trees and brush with arrows nocked. A frog fucker with mud caked on his face jumped from a branch above and dragged Simic below the water. Victorian felt something pierce his elbow as he threw himself behind a sagging stone. The ambush was a mess of confusion. Victorian's vision swam and the colors around him pulsed with vibrance while the sound of his crew dying twinkled like bells. He somehow pulled himself up onto a solid bank and crawled his way through another pond. His skin prickled and each breath felt too hot on his tongue. The daylight peeking down from the canopy flickered and he swore he saw trees standing up from their watery cradles and walking away, roots trailing behind like a woman's gown. Where was the sea? Where were the waves? He struggled to his feet, unsteady as a green boy stepping onto a deck for the first time. Where was his father? Where were his brothers? Shades flew in the corners of his eyes. He saw Melin's long black hair, sweat-stained in the birthing bed where she died. He heard Nigella's shuddering cough that threw blood down her chin. He felt the delicate crunch of Sigurd's bones as her skull splintered between his fingers. Victorian was Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet. He had paid the iron price every day of his life. He was born to rule and reave, to be worshipped by all his lessers. Where was his crown? Where was his throne of glory? The old way was the way of plenty, the way of the drowned god. His feet carried him forward. He tilted, there was no ground, only a fall and then thick water. Mud and sludge filled his mouth, as Victorian thrashed trying to balance himself. Victorian tried to cry out. His first memories were of the water, when his father took him down to the shore of Pike and dipped his hands into the salty brine. Quayan had done the same with each of his children. The first 3 sons from Lady Uma Stonetree, who died young, then with Balon and Euron. Victorian had seen him do the same with Oregon, Aaron and weak little Robin. Victorian tried to beat his feet. Your hands were born to these seas, Quayan would say, you must know them like your own skin. It was one of the few lessons he had taken to heart from his father. A weak spirit, Balon had always whispered after a shouted argument. Quayan had the arms of an Iron King of yore, but shackled himself to the mainland. His sons had always wanted more. Victorian tried to reach the surface. Aaron had wanted more wine before the drowned god put the fear in his little brother. Euron wanted more of that which no sane man could see, the mad fool. Balon had wanted glory, and a crown, always a crown. What had Victorian wanted? Pain raced through his leg, something latched onto the meat of his thigh. Teeth tearing in the muscle and tendon. Was the drowned god claiming him? Would he find his wives in the watery halls? Would he find his brothers? His father? Vacation tried to breathe. He could not. Forward slash 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 forward slash. A forward slash n, and so we come to the end of the song arc. I personally loved writing the last 2 chapters. It feels great to really set things in writing that I came up with literally years ago. Where will we go next? Back north? South? Somewhere else? Let's find out. Chapter 51, The Black Kraken. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Another war horn cried, bouncing off thick trees, deep brush, and the windows and walls of deep wood motte. The horns had been ringing out all day. A warning more than a greeting. Don't these horsens get tired of hearing themselves squawk? Asher Greyjoy, the Kraken's daughter, captain of the Black Wind, sat in a high-backed chair, carved with flowing scenes of elks and birds. A long table sat in front of her and men were seated around it. Deepwood Motte had been taken after a month-long siege. Her longships had taken the tide sands north of the castle swiftly. Asher led most of her 1,000 raiders against the walls, but she left a token force of longships to patrol up to Bear Island. In truth, Asher wished she had taken Bear Island first, but there were captains under her who would brook no deviation from her father's commands. Instead, they had set down for a siege. Asher gave credit when due, the Glovers had fought hard. They had sharp spears and sturdy shields and met each assault head-on. Deepwood itself had no stone walls and eventually they gave way. Lady Sybil Glover and her 2 children would make fine hostages if Asher could get them back to the islands. The lady had some steel in her spine, but melted with her children in harm's way. Asher had them under guard in one of the family chambers. What do the sentries see? Asher asked her council of captains. Tristiffer Botley, the heir of Lord Sport, leaned forward. The ones who arrived first raised the Glover fist above their own banners. It's a hard task to count their numbers, but we've heard them felling trees. He was always eager to please her. If Asher thought him a stronger man, she might even look at him as more than a bootlicker. Those horn blasts are from the newcomers, bloodless Tom Codd said, not a splint of plate in sight, just chainmail and furs, but they've come in force. I'd wager at least 3,000. It rankled her to have a cod at her table. She'd never known a member of that house to be anything other than eels in the shape of men, but the Lamentations crew had taken first blood on the walls and earned some recognition. She also knew bloodless Tom to have a keen eye. The man never sailed against an enemy he didn't outnumber. Asher flipped a dagger between her hands. It's as if every knot and hollow hides more men. The captains ate their fill and drank what they had dragged up from the castle larder. Asher watched as the servants scurried back and forth. The maids were quivering and the men were silent. Asher knew they were the lucky ones. The small folk who survived had already been taken back to the ships. The Maester says the banners are of the mountain clans, loyal as dogs to the Starks and rabid in battle. Wildlings on the wrong side of the wall in his opinion. Natural climbers as well, if the man is to be believed, Donald Drum told her. He was a pessimistic cunt, but he kept his oars straight and had the ear of his father, Lord Dunstan, the bone hand. I want to know how they got here so damn quick, Tristiffer moaned. We shot every bird we could, and the Ravelry was empty long before we got inside. Donald frowned and reached into his coat. He threw a letter, seal already broken, across the table. The Maester had that among his things. Asher opened it and read quickly. The Starks acted quickly. They were already moving against my uncle, Asher relayed. This says the Glovers were to rally with the mountain clans and Mormonts to guard the coast. A few of the captains laughed, the rest were quiet. Tom Codd shoved his empty plate aside. If they were already marching, then more could be on the way. Whatever strength is left in this land is aimed squarely at us. Have you gotten no word back from the Lord Captain? Asher threw Tom glare. The man was already wetting his breeches at the thought of a counter-attack. Not without reason, but to not even make a show of courage was pathetic. Nothing yet. Carl should be returning soon with news from Damfair and Clefture, Asher told them. We must prepare in case the Northmen lose their patience. Call back the patrols around Bear Island. Donald drained his goblet. I'd call it 500 men from Glover's vassals, 3,000 mountain men. What preparations can we make? If the Lord Captain cannot send us reinforcements, then how are we to hold this tinderbox? They could not, Asher decided. Victorian had taken 8,000 men to Moat Cailin, gave Aaron 400 to raid and 1,000 for her. The full might of the Iron Fleet, such as it was, had been spent on this war. 110 ships in total, 100 longships and 10 galleys. The galleys had docked at a small island off the coast of the Rills, Small Shale it was called. They were too large to enter the narrow rivers, and no ports rested along the western shore to properly dock them. From Small Shale, the men had been divided between the longships and set off. If Asher reckoned with the truth of it, the Iron Fleet had not been ready. Her father had not wished to call upon the Bannerman's fleets. The victory against the North would be his and his alone, he had declared. Victorian had just gone along with it, No arguments came from the Lord Captain. Why would he quarrel? More glory and gains for him and his supporters. Asha may be the princess and presumptive heir to the Seastone chair, but her father brooked no disagreement. Their strength was scattered, and she did not know what her uncle planned. He had taken Moat Cailin quickly, and had been there nearly 3 months by the time Asha had won her siege. Surely, her father had given him orders to hold the moat while pushing farther up the rivers. If the reavers struck for Torrens Square or Barrowtown, eyes and arms would be drawn there, leaving Asha to take Bear Island and more of the Wolf's Wood. A week after her victory over House Glover, and here she sat, with no word by sea or bird. Asha had to decide her next course. // In the blink of an eye Deepwood Mott was being swarmed and slipping from her fingers. The Northmen had even less patience than Asha assumed. Another week of horn calls and the enemy decided they had enough men to attempt an assault. There'd been a token effort to gain her surrender, but Asha had sent a goat in one of Lady Sybil's dresses out the front gate to negotiate for her. The Northmen had sent axemen with thick bellies and massive shields to chop down her gate. The ladders and arrows came fast to hold them on the walls. Asha took careful aim and let loose another shaft, striking a greybeard carrying a ladder in the throat. Another took his place before the ladder even hit the ground. She heard the clash of blades and screams as a different ladder was sent back down to the earth. As one side of her defense was bolstered, she saw men thrown from another wall. Northern warriors in heavy armament clambered over the lip. They were met by Andric the Unsmiling, called the fiercest living Ironborn by the bards. Andric was bigger than any Northman she'd seen, and he had plenty of experience peeling men from their armor. Yet for every suit Andric filled with blood, 10 men slipped past and descended into the yard. More men felt the bite of Asha's axe, and with Carl at her back not one blade touched them. The banners came closer and closer and the pounding on the gate grew fiercer and fiercer. Asha rallied her men and began pulling back to the castle proper. Her plan was to draw the Northmen in, and while they clambered up and down the walls, she would escape through a postern gate at the rear of the castle. They'd make for the safety of their ships and be gone before any could catch them. Better to live another day than die in this rotting hall. Just as the last of her men made it across the castle threshold, Asha saw the front gate bulge and buckle, thrown down with such force the thick timber splintered. She gasped as 2 giant bears surged forward, a man bigger than even Andric between them, clad in ringmail with an axe taller than Asha herself. Northmen streamed in, running straight for the castle and any of her raiders who lagged behind. "Barricade the door!" Asha shouted. Her captains and crews rushed for their escape, grabbing whatever supplies and loot they could find. Someone grabbed the Glovers. She ordered, but she had no time to see if anyone obeyed. They plunged into the corridors. Maids and servants were tossed aside. The roars of men and bears echoed behind them. From the hall to the open sky, the Ironborn ran and fought. Her men were rattled but discipline held steady. The longships were filled and pushed into the water. Asha watched as the sight of the woods mixed with the mist and the open sea took them back into her bosom. "Fuck it all," Asha muttered, dropping her head down. "My captain mopes, has she lost something precious?" Carl squatted down beside her. She looked up and spied fresh cuts on his hands and a bruise on his dainty cheek. Asha shook her head. "Just any chance for peace when I see my father next. A quarrel for another day. The men got a taste of blood and we've lost enough souls to make a good showing of it," Carl pointed out. He must have sensed her darkening mood and sought to cushion it. Soft in bed and but a killer in battle, that was what made him her favorite. No doubt Tristifa was wroth that Carl had returned to her side. He had brought no news with him. Aaron and Dagmar had left Small Shale to raid by the time he docked. Asha leaned back against the mast of the Black Wind and looked out. The breeze was strong but settled and open sky sat above them. "Tell the fleet we make for Small Shale. I must speak with my uncles and we'd be better off counting our plunder and dead surrounded by water," she said. Carl nodded and went to carry her words. The fleet swiftly turned and made good time along the coast. Cravens, old men, and green boys, that was all the North had left, her father said. Where had he heard that lie? No doubt armies had marched south to fight for the Iron Throne, and they were deep in the Westerlands still, but what had been left behind was no meager scraps. Asher thought back to the mustering of House Greyjoy's strengths in those weeks before they set sail. Pike had been full to bursting with guests and warriors, but Asher's eyes in the castle had spotted strangers among them. At first she suspected they were sell-sails or perhaps even spies. Until a dockmaster on her pay recognized one of the visitors as a merchant captain from Fair Isle, one who had a reputation as an old acquaintance of Tywin Lannister. Was it a coincidence? She had much to speak with her father about. The north had been plundered, they could take their modest treasures and thralls home. Moat Cailin would hold the neck closed against the Starks. The King on the Hill and the Stone Stag were still ripping the Reach and Westerlands apart, it was fertile land for raiding. The rowers fell into their rhythm and Asher allowed herself to sit and breathe in the sea air. She'd taken a castle and sat as its lady. She loved her ship, and the drowned god would take her before she left the waters for good, but a castle and lands of her own tempted her imagination. Asher could see between the sea spray a future where she ruled the coasts of a kingdom, perhaps the Reach. Her father would name her Princess of the Shield Islands. She'd raise a great fleet of her own and harvest wheat and timber from the Mandaya. Then drink wine while the lords of Highgarden and Old Town showered her with tribute. A pretty dream. Like all things pretty, it was delicate and she would need wits, hope and fate's favor to reach it. That night she indulged in Carl's attentions and supped on hard-won ale. The mood of the fleet was dark but Asher had only fled at the last moment, none among them would speak against her. Small Shale was still empty when they arrived. The galleys remained moored and the crews were happy to see them. Hazenhorn and his daughter, Hazetha, were put in charge of her ship's treasure as it was added to the hoard her uncles had gathered. They spent a week on repairs and funeral rites. She disliked taking priests on her vessel, but they had followed Uncle Aaron like barnacles and many had remained with the galleys to pray for the drowned god's favor. Oreg Salttongue performed well enough as he laid her men to rest. She was truly sad to lose any of her men. Fingers, Grimtongue and Rook had been with her for years and she grieved for them. It was not hard to find eager hands to fill the Black Wind's oars, time would tell if any of them were worth their piss. The ships that had lost captains were already seeing the pecking orders established. Doubtlessly there'd be a few deaths but most of the crews would come to her soon enough and announce their succession. It was the way of things. Finally, a lookout spied many longships returning. Asher was at the beach to meet them. Her smile died out when of all people, Dagon, the Black Shepherd, came ashore. "What brings you here alone, Shepherd?" Asher called out, "and with so many ships." Dagon took off his helmet, a bandage was wrapped around one of his ears. "Ill tidings, Captain Asher, ill tidings. We come from Moat Cailin." Asher chuckled, "Well, if you came from anywhere else my uncle would split your head open." Not a man among the newcomers laughed, they were dough, even for reavers. Asher searched the ships but couldn't spot the Iron Victory. Asher stalked forward. "Where is the Lord Captain?" she demanded. "I don't know," he replied. Nearby priests gave a cry and gathered, men swarmed forward to help empty the longships and badger for gossip. Asher laid a hand on her dagger hilt. "You will explain yourself, Shepherd." Dagon looked to her waist. He nodded. "The Northmen laid siege to the moat. The Lord Captain ordered me to break for the Fever River and take as many ships as I could to find Clefture and Damfair. They turned and walked to the camp farther up the island. We found most of Damfair's force scattered across the coast. They were hounded from the stony shore by horsemen from House Dustin and Riswell." Dagon continued, "Before I could turn back more ships came upon us." He turned and pointed to a circle of battered longships with ripped sails drifting in the shoals. 24 stragglers, half of them raiders who were away from Moat Cailin when the siege began, he explained. They made for the river after seeing the Direwolf banner raised above the causeway. Asher was silent, white knuckles gripped her dagger. "How," she whispered, "how could anyone take the moat that easily?" "I've no idea," Dagon admitted, "but unless the Lord Captain escaped into the swamp, he is lost to us, dead or taken prisoner." Asher felt a lance of pain skitter across her brow. She pinched her nose. "What about Damfair?" she asked. Dagon nodded. "He and Dagmar live and I spread a message to rally here." "I didn't expect to find you, Captain Asher." Asher cut off his next question. "The Northmen have strength left to them, as you know." They were already on their way to Deepwood Motte and strange magics were about. 2 bears broke down the front gate and the castle was lost to us. He absorbed her words as he filled 2 cups of ale. "The drowned god does not favor those who cling to the green land," Dagon quoted. "King Balon will not be pleased with our failures." Asher drank deeply. "How many ships did you bring from the Fever River?" "As many as we could, with barely enough men to sail straight. A few floundered in the river. All told, I'd say 40," he counted. "I have 10," Asher thought aloud. "Cleftior took 6 for the raids. That makes 6 to 6. Dagon looked to the sky, his cup still full. "Do we return?" The Black Shepherd had earned his reputation as a quick killer, but his name came from a quarrel with his kin so deep it nearly came to blood. She knew he rarely set foot on the home islands if it could be helped. She decided, "I don't fancy spending a few moons on this barren rock. We'll collect whoever we can, wait for Damfair and Cleftior, then sail home." Dagon watched her for a moment, then nodded. "You have my ships." She would need them. Her father's great plan had not gone further than making the North pay for the humiliation done to him. Now his revenge was out of reach. They would not have surprise on their side if they invaded again. Dagon left her there, eager to tend to his ships. Asher strode to a higher vantage point, a hill covered in old stumps. Longships anchored near the shore or were dragged up the sands for inspection. The galleys were being emptied of supplies and the quartermasters were already busy making counts and handing out rations. In the distance, Asher noticed a lone black sail, bearing the scythe of Harlaw. A seabird cried out above her head and she saw a roll of storm clouds swarming from the east. The rain came fast and hard and soaked the Ironborn head to toe as they scrambled to get under cover. The Harlaw ship managed to slip into the bay before the waves stirred to their full strength. It was no simple messenger who came to Asher's tent but her cousin, Baymen Harlaw, one of Bormund the Blue's sons. "Baymen," she greeted, "come to join our great conquest. Or has Nuncle Roderick sent you?" Baymen had the Harlaw look but an unfortunate lack of teeth. Her kinsman stepped forward but his usual gappy smile was absent. "Asher, I bring ill tidings," he told her. The rain slammed down and the wind howled, like the storm god was proclaiming his dominion across the land. "King Balon is dead. // // / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / //. The rain followed them home. She spotted the high points of 10 towers in between the lightning strikes. Many of her captains urged her to sail for Pike, but her heart guided her to Harlaw, to the uncle she felt closest to, Roderick the Reader. The wealth of Harlaw had long made House Harlaw one of the most prominent families of the Iron Islands. They did not have the largest island, that was Great Wyk, but they outclassed all their neighbors in income and people. Her uncle had built more trading cogs than longships in the last few years, and the merchants made a point of stopping on Harlaw with their best goods. They knew Lord Harlaw kept a firm hand on his docks and made trade easy and plentiful. Her uncle wasn't the milksop his detractors claimed either. He enjoyed his books too much, but he had sailed his fair share and earned the respect of his captains. Asha would need his support to claim her rightful place as Queen of the Iron Islands. The Iron Fleet was still under her command, but that would change as they returned to their homes. No doubt the lords had already been bickering like old fishwives the moment they found her father's corpse. Her father. He was dead and gone. The former Lord Reaper of Pike. He was alone, she realized, when he died. His brothers and daughter had left to carry out his orders, his wife here on another island, and Belong Greyjoy had fallen from the bridges of his own castle. Lost to the storm, Aaron had ranted. Damfair had arrived at Small Shale with Dagmar Clefture in one piece, but they had left behind 3 ships. They'd been hunted down by horsemen from the Rills. The raiders had been caught in the open and tracked from camp to camp. Each exchange cost them men and supplies until Clefture ordered they turn back to the coast. Aaron had left the fleet and set off for Great Wyk the moment he learned of the king's death. He told her his aim was to gather the holy men, but Asha took careful note that he never gave his support to her claim on the throne. Rather, he'd sent his faithful to interrogate every survivor from Moat Cailin about Victorian, hoping against hope that the Lord Captain might still live. That alone told her who Damfair truly wanted to succeed her father. Dagmar had remained with her and kept much of the fleet from scattering. He was loyal to her family, and had spent more time raising Asha and Theon than any of their kin. Though younger men were the focus of the tavern songs, Cleftjaw was still a name feared. Asher was under no illusion that ascending the throne would be easy. Theon was gone, either dead or squirreled away in some northern cell, and that left Asher as her father's chosen heir. She would need to gather the support of the great houses, keep control of the Iron Fleet, and get the blessings of the priests. Once she sat the sea stone chair and heard the oaths of her lords, then she could turn her mind to ruling. Taking a moment to admire the silhouette of 10 towers, Asher ordered her crew to dock by her uncle's ship, the Sea Song. There were mounts waiting for her. It seemed her approach had been noticed, or maybe expected. The stable hand came out, covered in an oilskin cloak. He took one look at her, then bowed deeply. "Princess Greyjoy," he greeted, and offered her a garron. She took the reins with a nod, Dagmar, Cull, Tristaifer Botley and Donald Dustin in tow. They ambled up the paths with lamplight as a guide. They came to the foot of the anchor tower and found the doors open and her Aunt Gwyness Harlaw waiting with warm mead. "Aunt!" Asher cried out as she flicked rainwater out of her hair. Princess Asher Gwyness returned. Her aunt was reserved for the most part and forgetful. It was surprising that she even recalled Asher's title. "My brother awaits you." "He left his tower?" Asher asked. Her aunt turned to guide her deeper into the castle. "He's even put down his book," she confirmed. She'd call her aunt a liar if the proof wasn't put in front of her. The hall was full of fires and feasts, captains, lords and every prominent name that called Harlaw home. She recognized Sir Harris Harlaw, the Knight of Grey Garden, the Lords of Kenning, Mayo, Stone Tree, Vomark, even a few good brothers and a black tide. Her uncle sat at his high table, mug in hand and no book in sight. Aunt Gwyness left her side, walking over to a table packed with other spinsters and widows. Uncle Roderick's eyes locked onto her as the servants closed the doors. Her uncle kept a plain appearance. Brown hair, brown eyes and a short grey beard that he always kept neat. Roderick rose and slammed his hand on the table. The hall quieted. "Princess Asher Greyjoy," he called out, "be welcome to 10 Towers. Come, I offer you safe anchorage for your ship, food for your crew, and a place at my table." Formal words, the kind Asher only ever heard when she accompanied her father on his infrequent visits to the other islands. "I accept, Lord Harlaw. While I am here my hands will defend your halls, and my crew your waters," she replied. Roderick swiped with his hand and the men sitting to his right vacated their spots. Asher and her entourage swaggered forward, all eyes were on her. She did not look like some Southron lady. She had no long, luscious hair or trailing dresses of silk and lace. She had a soaked gamison, chainmail that needed washing, and an axe with a fresh edge. In other words, she was perfectly attired. She clasped hands with the men she knew among the tables, greeted the women, called out old nicknames and insulted one or two motherless cunts before she reached the head table. "Uncle!" Asher readily embraced him, clutching tightly to those familiar shoulders. "You've many guests," she whispered in his ear. "They've come to see you," he replied. Asher glanced at their audience. "I planned on visiting them myself, taking my time to sup and soften them to me. I had to." Roderick offered her a full mug, the crow's eyes on Pike. The goblet spilled as Asher whipped her head around. "Euron's returned." "When?" Roderick quaffed his own drink. "The silence was spotted near Saltcliffe a few days before your father's death. And he's still on Pike." "What did he come back for?" Roderick looked her in the eyes, a cold weariness seeped into his expression. "He came for the throne. He's already claimed the castle." Asher's lips curled. "No one stopped him. Euron was exiled by order of the king." Swain Botley tried. Roderick glanced at Tristaifer, already sitting and eating. "Euron had him drowned in a barrel of sea water." "Fuck," Asher cursed, "this can't be allowed to stand." Roderick laid a hand on her shoulder. "House Greyjoy is divided. I can't predict what Damfair will do. Euron is too mad to trust with the throne. That leaves you and Uncle. Victorian never returned from Moat Cailin. He's a corpse or a hostage by now," Asher explained. Roderick stared back. "I know, niece, I have sources of my own. I wasn't speaking of the Lord Captain." Asher leaned on the chair beside her. "Then who else is there? I'm not going to cede any power to some cousin. No offense to your own family." Roderick shook his head. "I'm not talking about distant family." A side door to the hall opened. Asher's eyes glanced over Roderick's shoulders at the movement and watched a man enter. He stopped to speak with a servant, his back was to her. He was unfamiliar. Lean and dark-haired. He wore a finely made doublet and high boots buckled in the way of a sailor. A strange-looking blade hung from his belt and some kind of bright hide adorned his shoulders. The firelight glinted off the rings on his hands and both his ears were adorned with gemstone studs. If she wasn't mistaken, there was a streak of green in the hair at his temple. Some visitor from the Free Cities. Her uncle made a point of cultivating contacts in Essos. The man finally turned and her heart skipped a beat. She knew that face. It had laughed with her as they ran through the halls of Pike. It had cried when King Robert came to burn their home. She had seen that face terrified as a strange man took it away to some far-off land. Her brother stood before her alive and free. Theon was looking at her now. She didn't know what thoughts flew through his mind. Were they the same as hers? Asha couldn't even begin to guess. This man was a stranger to her. He had been raised in some ancient fortress far from the sea, under the eyes of a wolf lord. Did he sail? Had he paid the iron price? Or was he a Greenlander now, all signs of his heritage stripped from his spirit? Asha swallowed when Theon stepped forward. He wore a shy smile, it reminded her of their mother. "Hello, princess," her brother said. The end.